Do you know the feeling when you've been trying to solve one mystery for your entire life? Nope? Well, Detective Anderson does. During almost 30 years of working for the police, he solved many riddles, caught hundreds of robbers, and helped save thousands of lives. There's a huge number of successfully solved cases on his record. At the age of 25, he caught a thief who changed his own face with plastic surgery once a year. When Anderson was 30, prisoners started breaking from jails all over the world. The detective successfully solved this case. At the age of 38, he discovered the secret base of a forbidden order in a volcano's mouth. By his 50s, he managed to explain all the most inexplicable things in the world. But there was something he couldn't solve. These were two mysteries from the 50s, cases of missing planes. All these years, Anderson has been scrolling through the details of this puzzle. Unfortunately, he was too young when this story began. All he had were guesses and notes. But today, a sudden thought struck him. For the first time in many years, he felt that he could finally solve this mystery. But to do this, he had to immerse himself in this story again. So he opened the closet and pulled out two old magazines with detailed articles about these incidents. The first one happened in the summer of 1955. July 1st, PanAm Flight 914 was about to depart from New York Airport with 61 people on board. The plane model was a Douglas DC-4. It differed from modern aircraft, having giant propellers instead of turbines. So, all passengers fastened their seatbelts. The plane started taxiing down the runway, sped up, and took off. It went high into the sky and out of sight. Its destination was Florida. The flight time would be 3 hours. Dispatching services were watching the plane on their radar when suddenly, PanAm 914 disappeared. The operator tried to contact the pilot but received no response. New York reported this to Florida. They said they couldn't see the plane either. Usually, pilots notify via radio if a plane crashes or gets into a storm. But this time, just nothing. After several unsuccessful attempts to establish the connection, they deployed large-scale search operations. Communication with the plane was interrupted when it was flying over the Atlantic Ocean. Therefore, the air company had to admit the aircraft crashed into the water. But this version had no proof. When planes fall that way, rescuers find floating debris. Some parts of the cabin or luggage always get to the surface. This time, rescuers found nothing. The plane didn't transmit any distress signals and didn't leave any traces of the crash. It seemed like it just disappeared into thin air. People forgot about this disaster for 37 years. And then, something bizarre happened. 1992, Venezuela, Caracas Airport. The control tower received a signal about an unknown aircraft approaching them. It was weird because it wasn't supposed to be there. There were no flights scheduled for that time. The plane was landing. The dispatcher and the rest of the airport staff understood that something was wrong here. The plane looked old, with huge propellers instead of turbines. After landing, the pilot contacted the airport.
Where are we?
The dispatcher asked him to identify himself. A few seconds later, he received an answer.
We are PanAm Flight 914 departed from New York to Florida with a crew of 4 people and 57 passengers on board.
The dispatcher didn't know what to do next. He and the airport staff understood what kind of plane they were looking at. What was this plane doing 37 years later and almost 1,240 miles away from its destination? After a few seconds, the startled dispatcher turned on the microphone and said,
It is September 9th, 1992. You know that?
A long pause followed. Then, the pilot responded in a panic.
Oh no. Jimmy, where are we? No! Stay away! Let's go now!
The airport staff saw the pilot waving his hands in horror through the glass. Then, he started the engines and took the plane to the runway. PanAm 914 increased its speed and took off. The dispatcher tried to stop him, but the pilot didn't respond. The plane disappeared into the sky, and no one else had heard of it since that day. Detective Anderson finished reading the article. He frowned and looked out the window. Raindrops were hitting the glass. The storm outside perfectly depicted what was happening in his mind at that moment. He seemed to know what had happened to that plane. All the clues were there, lying right in front of his eyes. But to know for sure, Anderson had to move on to the next case. It was another article, dated 1989. It happened in 1954. Santiago Airlines Flight 513 took off from West Germany Airport. The plane was due to land in Brazil in 18 hours. There were 88 passengers and 4 crew members on board. The plane hid behind the clouds and disappeared from all radar. Air traffic controllers were trying to contact the pilots, but didn't receive a response. 18 hours later, they called the airport in Brazil. Those dispatchers couldn't confirm this plane's landing and couldn't contact the pilots either. The search operation lasted for several months, but they found nothing. Just like in the PanAm 914 case, the plane disappeared from radar while flying over the Atlantic Ocean. 2 years later, the search operation ended, and Santiago Airlines ceased its activities. October 12, 1989. Airport controllers in Brazil noticed a passenger plane that suddenly appeared on their radar. It didn't answer the airport staff's questions and just circled over the airbase. After a few minutes, the plane landed and nothing. No one opened the ramp. Passengers didn't get out. Pilots didn't respond. The aircraft was in perfect condition. One of the dispatchers realized that this was the missing Santiago Airlines Flight 513 that had been considered lost for 35 years. Airport staff approached the plane and opened the doors. What they saw there terrified them. The police, customs staff, doctors, detectives, and other airport staff members gathered around the plane. No one knew what to do next. There was no living person on board who could tell the truth. The plane disappeared in 1954 and appeared 35 years later in perfect condition without any damage. So far, no one has figured out what happened. Detective Anderson noticed the stories were very similar. PanAm 914 disappeared in 1955. Santiago Airlines 513 vanished in 1954. The difference was almost a year. Anderson scratched his head and noticed another little detail. Both planes went missing from the radar the moment they were flying over the Atlantic Ocean. There are many myths about phantom ships and mysterious phenomena connected with the Bermuda Triangle. Detective Anderson knew these tales, but these 2 missing planes puzzled him. He looked at 2 articles and understood everything. Exactly! The solution was there, right in front of his eyes. Both stories were written in the same newspaper. There was no real dispatcher who communicated with the planes. Nothing was known about the passengers. No newspapers except this one published news about these missing aircraft. It seemed they just took the same story and changed the dates, locations, and names of flights. Yes, the case was solved. It was all fake. The rain stopped. Detective Anderson looked out the window and heard the sound of a passing train. He remembered another weird and fake story. A story about a phantom train. It took place in Italy in 1911. 100 passengers boarded the train of the Zanetti Railway Company. It went through the picturesque mountainous area, got into a mountain tunnel, and disappeared. No one else had seen the train since then. All the passengers were lost, but not for long. They appeared in the past. There were records dated 1845. One unknown doctor from Mexico City wrote about 100 Italians who appeared in the city from nowhere. They were all dressed strangely and talked about one mysterious train. This was a completely made-up story. There was no proof or records about this train and the people who got into the past. A loud sound interrupted his thoughts. Detective Anderson picked up the phone. He was silently listening to the person on the other end of the line. A minute later, he answered, "Yes." The detective put the phone down. It was a new mystery for him. In the Sahara Desert, the locals noticed a huge ship lost in the South Pacific 27 years ago. There was no crew on board, no cargo, and no flags. No one knew how it appeared among the sand, but wet mud formed around it because of moisture. It seemed like the ship had just teleported there from the water. Perfect! No fakes this time. Detective Anderson put on his hat and left the office. But this story is for another video.
piano parlor at 35,000 feet. You won't believe you're on an airplane. That could have been the slogan of American Airlines. They pulled 50 seats out of each Boeing 747 and used the space to create a passenger lounge with armchairs, cocktail tables, and even a Wurlitzer electric piano. Their passengers could sing their favorite songs to the tickled ivories during long flights across the country. Luxury in economy. In the early 1980s, Continental Airlines installed so-called Polynesian pubs in some of its DC-10 jets. It was a small bar with snacks and drinks, round tables, and swivel chairs. There was also a video pong console. Continental took an approach worth appreciating. This kind of luxury was for economy-class passengers. Now imagine what first class was getting. Fine dining and flying. Australia's largest airline, Qantas, boasted a luxurious Captain Cook first-class lounge. The company turned the 747's upper deck into a full-on restaurant. It had it all: good food, good drinks, and good company. Flowers to prove a point. Pan American World Airways advertised the 707 Clipper as a machine without vibration. They put fresh flowers in a vase on each table to show passengers that the water wouldn't spill right on their laps during the flight. PanAm featured freshly cut flowers until the late 1970s. Slightly questionable if turbulence struck, but still romantic. Full-size beds. During the 1940s, everyone enjoyed the privilege of sleeping comfortably during a flight. On the Boeing Stratocruiser, seats were roomy and could be turned into a full-on bed. The aircraft even had spacious locker rooms where passengers could change into their PJs or into a different outfit. Ooh, how the times have changed. Wacky colors. Until the mid-60s, airplanes were painted in light colors, or not at all. The only bright spot was usually a colored strip along the fuselage. But not American airline Braniff International. They hired a famous architect and interior designer, Alexander Gerard, to make their planes brighter. He used a vibrant palette that includes such shades as purple metallic and lemon yellow. But why dabble in bizarre paint jobs when you can make wacky planes, like the Flying Barrel? Officially called the Stipa Caproni, it was one of the funniest planes in aviation history. Italian engineer Luigi Stipa designed the thing to have its propeller inside the bulky barrel-like fuselage. The bizarre-looking plane actually proved to be quiet and stable in flight. The only drawback was the speed. It couldn't go much faster than 80 miles per hour because of drag. That wasn't much, even for the 30s. 9-winged super boat plane. Well, what else can you call it? Officially, it was the Caproni CA-60. Yep, the same aircraft manufacturer that built Luigi Stipa's weird barrel design. If you're wondering whether this thing could really fly, the answer is not really. It had a brief maiden flight, but wasn't successful on its second attempt. Its dreams of soaring across the Atlantic went down with it. A wingless plane. Famous aeronautical engineer Alexander Lippisch contributed a lot to the study of aerodynamics. But man, did he make some weird aircraft. His Dornier Aerodyne was basically another flying barrel, only this one didn't have wings at all. It's a vertical takeoff and landing aircraft that, unfortunately, lost the popularity contest to helicopters. The Spruce Goose. Meet the largest flying boat ever built. Officially called the Hughes H-4 Hercules, the aircraft was nicknamed the Spruce Goose because of its birch frame. The plane was made from wood because of an aluminum shortage at the time. Its first flight was also its last. The wooden giant managed an altitude of 70 feet over the water, but landed after going a mere mile. The Flying Umbrella. In search of better performance and reliability, aeronautical engineer Paul Nemeth developed a round-wing plane. People who saw his Nemeth parasol aptly dubbed it the Flying Umbrella. Its strangely circular wing was set 16 feet wide, enough to set a Volkswagen Beetle on top. Though only one prototype of the Nemeth parasol was ever built, this plane entered the list of the weirdest aircraft design. The Flying Pancake. This delicious-sounding breakfast-inspired nickname belongs to the Vought V-173. It was an experimental vertical takeoff and landing plane. It was called a pancake because of its yellow disc-shaped body. This thing was pretty much wingless. Any lift generated was all thanks to that flat fuselage. An inflatable plane. In the 1950s, Goodyear created the inflatoplane. The idea was to use it as a rescue aircraft that could be rolled up and packed into a small container. I'm talking smaller than your average bed. It was made of fabric to make that possible and could be blown up to full size, all 20 feet of it, in only 5 minutes. But in 1972, the project was shut down because of its main drawback. The plane could be popped with a single pinprick. The Super Guppy. Try not to stare at his forehead. Go ahead. Nah, you can't not look at it. That's okay. The Aerospace Line Super Guppy is the only airplane that could fit an entire spaceship. And that's what mostly these models were made for, to transport NASA's rockets and their parts. So how did they load that massive cargo space? The plane's huge nose lifts up. NASA still uses one of these aircraft today. The Antonov AN-225. This monster of an airplane is quite the record holder. It can hold the most cargo with a maximum capacity of over 500,000 pounds, meaning this plane could transport your house somewhere if you're looking to relocate. It also has the longest wingspan, almost 300 feet. The Statue of Liberty could lie across it. Miniature aircraft. This plane is the exact opposite of the previous two. The McDonnell XF-85 Goblin was supposed to fit inside another plane. This aircraft made history as one of the smallest planes ever built. Because of its unusual shaped fuselage, the Goblin was nicknamed the Flying Egg. Unfortunately, it never made it past the prototype stage. The thing was too hard to control. Backward wings. When watching it in action, you'd think this plane was flying backwards. That's because the wings on the Grumman X-29 were angled in reverse. Strange as the design was, this plane had extraordinary maneuverability and a light structure. But of course, there was one major drawback. It was the most aerodynamically unstable aircraft ever built. The computerized flight control system had to make 40 corrections per second to provide some stability. Oops. The Chopper Cycle. The De Laughlin HZ-1 Aerocycle was an American single-pilot flying vehicle developed back in the 1950s. To turn left or right, they had to tilt the entire chopper in that direction, sort of like maneuvering a motorcycle. The Aerocycle could reach speeds of over 60 miles per hour, and apparently pilots only needed 20 minutes of instruction to learn how to fly it. The Boomerang Plane. At first glance, the Rutan Model 202 Boomerang looks like two planes holding hands in the air. But it's actually just one fuselage. It houses one propeller, and the other is on a separate engine nearby. Thanks to its strange but efficient design, the plane could fly nearly straight at all speeds even if one of its engines failed. Its designer, engineer Bert Rutan, used his own brainchild for personal transportation. Invisible aircraft. The Northrop Tasset Blue, nicknamed the Whale, looked like anything but a plane. But sometimes stealth outweighs aerodynamic concerns. The goal of this experimental plane was to show that an aircraft can be virtually invisible to radars. Thanks to its strange shape, the Whale could operate very close to the front line without being detected. Combo Craft Airship. Although it looks like a typical airship, the technology in the Lockheed Martin P-791 is much more sophisticated. It was built to combine the high speed of a jet with the buoyancy of a Zeppelin. This is a very fuel-effective solution. Hybrid airships burn less than 1/10 the fuel of a helicopter per ton. That little yellow hook you can see from the airplane's window if you're sitting next to the wing is there to help you in case of an emergency landing. Inflatable slides can only be deployed from the emergency exit doors in the front and the tail of the plane. In the middle, the passengers would have to walk right out on the wing and get to the ground from there. But jumping from the plane wing isn't safe because it's just too high. And here's where those little yellow hooks come in handy. The flight attendants tie ropes from the doors and through the loops for the passengers to hold onto. This way, everyone can safely get to the ground without injuries. Now, you want to try to avoid cozying up under airplane blankets. Some airlines only wash them about once a month. Better use your own travel blanket, a scarf, or a jacket, and always remember to wear your shoes while walking around the plane. That carpet on the floor can't and won't be cleaned to perfection between flights. It's just too much time and effort for the cabin crew. The dirtiest place on a plane isn't the bathroom, it's your tray table. It has 8 times more bacteria than an onboard toilet flush button. Now, in case of emergency, oxygen masks only have enough airflow to last for about 15 minutes. Luckily, it's just the amount of time a plane needs to find a suitable landing place or to at least descend to the altitude where people won't need oxygen masks anymore. You may wonder why you're asked to lift your seat back and close your tray table before takeoff and landing, but it's for your own safety. A reclined seat is comfy for you, but it makes it harder for the passenger behind you to get out of their seat, which is crucial in case of an emergency. The lower tray table is the same way, only this time it's you who won't be able to stand up fast enough if anything happens. Besides, the tray table prevents you from assuming the secure position in the event of an emergency landing. This position requires you to bend over in your seat, put your head between your knees, and cover the back of your head with your hands. Imagine doing that while your tray table is open. If you look around the cabin, you'll notice little black or red triangles around the midsection of the plane. These stickers let the flight attendants know where the airplane wings are located, so they can immediately look out the right window to see if something is amiss outside. You shouldn't lower the window shades while taking off, taxiing, or landing for 2 reasons. First, the flight attendants must always be able to monitor the situation outside, and open shades help them with that, obviously. Second, if something's gone wrong on board the plane while it's on the ground, for example, a fire, the ground crews won't be able to see it and evaluate the situation before going in unless the windows are open. That tiny hole you see at the bottom of any airplane window isn't there to scare you nuts. In fact, it helps keep the pressure from the inside and the outside of the window equalized. The hole itself is only made in the second layer of glass, and there are 3 of them overall, which also helps with security, by the way. Even if the outer glass breaks, there will still be 2 more to keep you safe. Now, you might see flight attendants touching the overhead compartments while they're walking along the aisle, but that's not exactly what they do. Right beneath the compartments, there's usually a handrail that goes all the way through the cabin, so you can also use this trick to stay firmer on your feet in the aisle. The pilots dim the lights in the cabin during nighttime, not for you to get cozy and sleepy. Our eyes have a hard time adjusting to darkness in the first few minutes of sudden lights out. And in the case of emergency, every second matters. So the lights get dimmed to let you get used to darkness in case something happens and you have to act fast. Pay attention to the aisle floor too. If there's an emergency landing at night, there will be 2 luminescent strips along the aisle showing you the way to the exit. Follow them to get safely out of the plane. Flight attendants also suggest counting the seats between you and the emergency exit once you're seated. This will help you navigate in case there's no other guidance available. If a lightning bolt hits the plane, the passengers won't feel it. The entire aircraft is covered with aluminum coating that conducts electrical current and doesn't let it inside. This protection is tested using a lightning simulator. Airplane windows are round because the air pressure is evenly distributed this way. If the plane's windows were square, strong air currents would accumulate in the corners of the windows, depressurizing the cabin. And that's bad. Don't think you become untouchable if you go to the airplane toilet. The bathroom door can be opened from the outside. There's usually a small latch at the top of the door that allows cabin crew to get you out of there. It's useful for both getting to people doing something suspicious in the bathroom and helping those who don't feel well and, for example, collapsed while in the toilet. Yeah, let's avoid doing that. The plane's wings flash red and green lights at night to show the direction the plane is heading in. A green light is always on the right wing, and a red one is on the left. Aircraft tires are designed to withstand 4 to 5 times more pressure than they actually experience upon landing. The wheel is more likely to break than the tire. Pilots always have different meals. This is necessary to reduce the risk of food poisoning. The flight can still go well if one of the pilots has gone down because of a stale burrito, but not if it's both of them. And try not to both of you eat the fish. Some airlines don't allow pilots to have beards. Facial hair can prevent securely fitting the oxygen mask, and pilots must always remain conscious. The seats are blue in most aircraft because this color soothes people. It's also easy to keep clean. The rumbling noise you hear after boarding the plane is luggage being loaded on the plane. The compartment is right beneath the cabin, so it can sound quite loud sometimes. On most flights longer than 7 or 8 hours, pilots have access to a specially designed rest seat in or near the cockpit. Flight attendants typically have a section of the cabin reserved for them, and it's sometimes separated from the passenger areas. Some larger aircraft even feature private crew quarters above or below the main cabin. The wings of most passenger aircraft are located at the bottom of the plane. It's called a low wing. Firstly, if you install the engine under low wings, it'll be closer to the ground and easier to repair. Secondly, the wings will take on part of the shock in case of a hard landing. And if the plane falls into the water, then the wings become a life-saving pillow. By the way, a plane can stay afloat for 10 minutes to 60 hours. It all depends on the model of the plane, weather conditions, and pilot skills. Now, most airplanes are white because this color best reflects the sun rays and the aircraft body doesn't heat up as much. Also, the damage is best seen on white, and white paint is simply cheaper. Shoulder straps seem more secure than just a waist belt, but not in the case of planes. When the plane gets into turbulence, it's tossed a bit in the air. The waist belt will simply hold you in place in case of a more severe shake. Shoulder straps would require more space between the seats, and this is not justified on a plane. In a car, the impact is usually much stronger, so you need that shoulder strap not to whoosh through the windshield. Flight attendant seats do have passenger straps, but that's because they are much less comfortable than passenger ones. They're narrower and positioned facing the passengers. Flight attendants need extra protection simply not to fall off their seats if the plane shakes hard enough. Also, they have to help and direct people during potential evacuation, and for that, they need to be in top shape. Now maybe you've noticed that you always enter the plane from its left side. Firstly, the captain usually sits on that side. This way, it's easier for the captain to align the plane with the terminal jet bridge. Also, the aircraft is fueled and loaded with the baggage on the right side. If passengers come from the left, the crew can do their job undisturbed.
The year is 2045. You arrive at the airport and get your face scanned with a biometric device that replaces your ID or boarding pass. Friendly robots pick up your luggage and direct you to your gate. You do some duty-free shopping in virtual reality and get in line to board the Flying V. You've picked your favorite seat in the second cabin. In there, you can choose between a staggered seat or a bed, even in economy class. You're walking past the group seat section, where friends and colleagues can spend time together face-to-face and discuss things. You're on a long-haul flight today, so you went for a bed to get all comfy on your way to your destination. With the Flying V, you can't choose to sit over or by the wing because all the passengers sit right in the wings of the plane. The cargo hold and fuel tanks are also in there. The plane looks like an arrowhead, with two wings stretching out behind the cockpit in a V shape. The oval cabin is pressurized and has an aerodynamic design. Everything inside the plane is made as light as possible. Thanks to it, it's more fuel efficient than other aircraft. The idea of this new revolutionary plane came to a student who was working on his thesis at Berlin's Technical University. It was further developed by the Delft Technical University in the Netherlands and supported by KLM Royal Dutch Airlines. They decided to make long-distance flights more sustainable. The Flying V shares many characteristics with the Airbus A350, the most advanced aircraft as of 2021. It can also seat 314 passengers and take up 1,700 square feet of cargo. It's smaller and shorter than the A350, but has the same wingspan of 213 feet, slightly longer than the height of the Leaning Tower of Pisa. It means it can fit in the same already existing gates, runways, and hangars at airports worldwide. It has less inflow surface area, which means less resistance. Less resistance means less fuel needed for the same distance, 20% less than the Airbus A350 to be precise. But it gets even better. KLM plans to make it completely emission-free with electrically boosted turbofans. They also believe they could keep manufacturing costs pretty low compared to other unusual and efficient new designs with unique components. Experts tested a 50-pound, 10-foot scale model of the new plane in July 2020. They controlled it remotely, and it successfully took off at a rather low speed, but had a rough landing. It means there's still work to be done to make future flights comfortable for all passengers, including those sitting close to the side of the aircraft. Airbus has spent months testing another unusually shaped plane. It's just 10 feet wide. That's about 3/4 the length of a Volkswagen Beetle. It looks like a flying wedge and could start a revolution in the aerospace industry, improving environmental performance. They believe the remote-controlled Maverick with a blended wing design has great potential. The fuselage in regular planes is basically useless weight and needs massive wings to stay aloft. With the new design, the whole airframe gives lift. It means the plane can be lighter and smaller and still carry the same weight. One prospective problem with Maverick could be boarding and leaving the aircraft. The wide central section could slow it down, and passengers in the middle would be far away from emergency exits in case they need them. At the same time, it would give passengers additional legroom and larger aisles. Another Airbus invention is an XLR plane with a third fuel tank that will travel up to 10 hours without the need to refuel, or 5,400 miles without stopping. That's 1,000 miles more than other narrow-body models. Boeing has spent years working on its own revolutionary concept, the transonic truss-braced wing. This plane has folding wings that are 170 feet long, longer than an average commercial plane. It's possible thanks to the truss used in plane construction that supports the extra-long, ultra-thin wing. It also makes the plane more aerodynamic and allows increasing its cruise speed up to some jetliner speed. The new design is going to need 9% less fuel than regular ones. It could even run on battery power for short-range flights and partially use electric power to get the needed thrust for longer distances. Switching to a gas and electric battery hybrid would help make flying cheaper. A Denver-based startup named Boom is determined to produce the first civilian supersonic jet after the collapse of Concorde almost 2 decades ago. They're partnering with Rolls-Royce to develop the engines for the future plane. It would fly at twice the speed of sound, but would be slower over land. It would still take passengers from the East Coast to London or from the West Coast to Asia in half the current time. They promise the fares won't be much higher than regular business class tickets, with an added bonus of oversized windows for all passengers. Boeing designed the biggest twin jet in the world for long-distance international routes, the Boeing 777X. It's meant to carry between 384 and 426 passengers and will have a unique folding wing. It will bend up at a right angle to fit the wide body into tight docking spaces at airports. The plane will have a wider cabin, dimmable windows, and supersized overhead bins. Some designers and aircraft engineers have been experimenting with plane concepts with no windows at all. One of them is called Ixion and has cabin walls lined with flexible high-definition screens, projecting 360-degree real-time video footage of what's going on outside the aircraft. 2 cameras mounted on the jet's wings would capture the image. The screens are supposed to be low voltage and powered by solar panels on the plane's roof. They could also use parallax technology to split the screen and let passengers see different views at the same time. 2 strips running along the jet's body would fit the air conditioning and cabin lighting. Windowless private jets of the future could have high-definition screens, programmed by passengers using their mobile phones, letting them choose what they want to see on each side of the jet. Removing the windows would reduce the weight of the aircraft and give more flexibility to the jet's interior design. It would also minimize engine noise by insulating the fuselage and also make the aircraft safer without the holes needed to install windows. The only exception would be the conventional window in the cockpit for the pilots. Airbus plans to reimagine the plane's interior with zones for passengers to do different types of activities. An area for business meetings, another one for socializing or playing virtual reality golf and other games. The screens in the social area could be connected to passengers' gadgets, letting them control what's on the screen and give presentations. They could also include a revitalizing zone where passengers can sit back and chill in a smart seat that will offer various pleasures, from a mechanized massage to aromatherapy. There will also be more planes with individual sleeping cabins, showers, and bar areas, and even full-size in-flight spa zones. Airbus is planning to build beds for economy-class passengers in cargo holds. They will be passenger modules of the same size and shape as cargo containers. Airlines will be able to load them aboard for long-haul flights and take them out for shorter flights or when they need extra cargo space. The modules will look somewhat like upscale hostel rooms, with all surfaces in glossy white and curtains for privacy. Economy class passengers will be able to rent one of the beds for less than the price of a business class ticket. They'll be able to stay there at all times, except for takeoff and landing, or rent a bunk for half of the time on flights of 12 hours or longer. Large aircraft already have bunk beds for crew members downstairs to let them rest on long-haul flights. They could also use cargo holds to host lounges, conference rooms, medical suites, and play zones for the youngest passengers in the future. Swappable modules could replace regular seats. Some airlines are experimenting with a meet and seat program. It lets you share your social media profile with other passengers on your flight. You can pick someone to sit next to based on your professional or personal interests, or just your likes. This option could spread to other carriers in the near future. A shadow is cast when you have an object in the path of light. Light travels in a straight line, which is why you always get a shadow when something's in front of a light source. Birds and airplanes are no exception. They do cast shadows, but we can't see them. The closer the object to a source of light, the denser its shadow, and vice versa. If the object is too far away, its shadow disperses. A commercial airplane flies at 35,000 to 40,000 feet. At such a height, you barely see the plane, let alone its shadow. It's too far from the Earth's surface, so its shadow is scattered, and you can't see it. The same goes for birds. But if there was a giant asteroid passing by the Earth, you'd see its shadow, based on the same principle by which lunar and solar eclipses work. A solar eclipse is when the moon is directly between the Earth and the sun, blocking the sun's rays. That casts a shadow on some parts of the Earth. The moon is 400 times smaller than the sun, but it's also 400 times closer to our planet than the star, which is why they seem the same size in the sky. But since the moon is smaller, its shadow is not big enough to cover the whole Earth, so it's only cast to some parts of it. Lightning is never a triangle, straight line, or circle. It has a zigzag shape. Lightning is an electric current, like those you have in your house, except this one is much more powerful. It always takes the path of least resistance. There are lots of things in the air, like dust particles, gases, and other substances, so it's uneven and irregular. Let's say you have a mound of sand. When you pour water, it won't flow downward in a straight line, but in specific patterns, seeking the best way through the sand. The same happens with lightning. Antarctica has icebergs that look like giant ocean waves frozen in motion. Despite their appearance, these formations are created over long periods of time. The ice got lifted, compacted, and shaped by the wind and other elements, accidentally taking the wave shape in the end. Blood Falls is a glacier in Antarctica that pours out some sort of red liquid that looks like blood. Scientists say it happens because there's a salty lake with a large iron content under the glacier. Salt water freezes at a lower point than fresh water, so it melts the ice above, letting the river flow. This is the coldest glacier on our planet, which is why the water can constantly flow without melting it. And the red color is because of the iron in the water. Antarctica is the only continent where you can't find reptiles. They're cold-blooded, which means they depend on heat from their environment to keep their bodies warm and can't survive in cold, icy regions such as Antarctica. Penguins can relax. No snakes or crocodiles to bother them there. Only a quarter of the Sahara territory is sand. There are mountains and oases, but most of the desert is covered in gravel. And it's not the biggest desert on Earth. Antarctica is. Just like people, trees also stop growing at a certain age. Scientists think this could be because when a tree gets old and reaches a certain height, it has trouble pulling water from the soil and pumping it all the way to the top because of gravity. Some trees, like the baobab, start growing out instead of up when they get to their full height. The baobab expands up to 0.4 inches every year. Australia is atop of one of the world's fastest moving tectonic plates. It moves 2.5 inches northward every year, which is about the rate our fingernails and hair grow. If you feel like trying to find something to watch on TV is just wasting your life, studies agree. The average person spends 1.3 years flipping between channels and trying to find something worthy of their attention. You can see a rainbow at night, too. It's a rare phenomenon called a lunar rainbow, or moonbow, and it appears when moonlight is reflected and dispersed through moisture and water droplets in the atmosphere. Lunar rainbows mostly occur in areas with high rainfall, or even near waterfalls surrounded by mist. When you crack an egg on land, it can turn into a mess, but 60 feet under the ocean, there's 2.8 times the atmospheric pressure on the egg, which is why it holds together like there's an invisible shell, and looks like some sort of weird jellyfish. Stars don't actually twinkle. Their light is constant and steady, but when it interferes with Earth's atmosphere, it bumps and bounces through the air, which bends the light. Different layers of air are constantly moving, which changes the bending of the light too, so it looks like twinkling. Hudson Bay, Canada is the area where gravity is lower than in other parts of our planet. It's not like people there are free-floating like in space, but it may feel like some sort of a natural geographical diet. Lower gravity leads to less density, so you'd weigh less there than anywhere else. Gravity depends on the density of the Earth, so it's uneven. When the last ice age hit, Hudson Bay was covered by a 2-mile thick glacier. It was heavy, so it kept pushing down on the rock underneath it. Over 20,000 years ago, the glaciers began to melt, but the Bay region was left deformed due to heavy ice that used to be there. The only sport someone played on the moon was golf. In 1971, an astronaut went to the moon and hit 2 golf balls, sending them flying through the low-gravity atmosphere on the lunar surface. The Great Wall of China is 5,000 miles long, so it would take you about 18 months to walk its length. Contrary to popular belief, you can't see it from space with your bare eyes. Lobsters are not biologically immortal. They age through time, but also produce a special enzyme that's in charge of repairing their cells. It also replicates their DNA indefinitely, so they can live for a very, very long time. If you went to the deepest part of the ocean, you'd feel an incredibly strong pressure, more than 8 tons per square inch, which is like having 50 jumbo jets lying on top of you. The sun is the biggest object you can find in our solar system. While there are so many rocky planets, gas giants, asteroids, and dwarf planets, the sun still makes up 99.8% of the total mass of our system. The sun is in the most stable stage of its life cycle at the moment, but in around 5 billion years, it will run out of hydrogen, its fuel. We can see sunsets because the atmosphere of our planet acts like a prism. Science calls it scattering. There's more distance between us and the sun at the time of sunset, meaning more particles and molecules are in the air. They scatter some of the short wavelength violet and blue light off in different directions. This process happens millions of times before the beam of sunlight gets to our eyes, and that's when we see some other colors of the spectrum, such as orange or yellow. Tsunamis can reach a speed of more than 500 miles per hour, which is as fast as a jet plane. They retain the energy, which means they can move across the ocean and almost not lose energy at all until they reach the shore. Octopuses are some of the most intelligent creatures in the sea. They navigate through mazes, solve problems, and have pretty good short-term memory. Scientists believe they're so smart because they live a pretty dynamic life. They move fast, hide in unpredictable places, expand across new habitats, move in unusual patterns, and let their tentacles into crevices for food. This is all challenging enough for their brain to develop all the time. The famous heads, known as Maui statues on Easter Island, have bodies too. They're just hidden beneath the surface. There are also 900 Maui statues on the island. Scientists discovered New Zealand is part of a larger landmass that lies under the water. 94% of the total land is under the surface. It's called Zealandia and is considered to be a microcontinent. Maybe it'll even be the 8th on the list someday.
You get on any airliner and notice the captain always sits in the left seat and the co-pilot on the right. And that's not by accident. The reasons could be historical. One theory goes that the first air forces were recruited from cavalry officers. They used to wear swords on their left side, so it was more comfortable for them to mount horses from the animal's left. When we eventually went from horses to metal birds, the tradition stuck. Another theory involves trains. The first international air route connected London and Paris. During this flight, pilots navigated by following the railroad. History has it that once, when the weather was especially bad, two planes collided because both were flying over the tracks. After that, it was agreed that the aircraft would fly on the right side of the track. Pilots had to sit on the left side of the plane to see how much clearance they had with oncoming aircraft on their left. As for helicopter pilots in command, they usually, but not always, sit on the right. Copters are more unstable than airplanes. That's why pilots prefer not to let go of the cyclic stick. This stick controls the helicopter's direction and altitude. The cyclic stick sits between the pilot's knees, and they use their right hand to hold onto it. The pilot's left hand moves the lever that changes the blade's pitch and presses other buttons on the central console. By the way, both seats have full control of an airplane. There are no regulations specifying which seat the captain and co-pilot should occupy. The co-pilot is just as experienced and capable of flying a plane as the captain. The captain often flies the plane to its destination, and the co-pilot operates it on the way back. Pilots are tested every 6 to 8 months. They use flight simulators and practice all kinds of emergencies. After that, examiners assess them. Safety and technical tests and medical examination also take place regularly. An extra seat in the cockpit behind the pilots is for inspectors who monitor the flight. This seat is also called a jump seat because when you get up from it, it folds up right away. Yep, a lot like movie theater seats. If you're a nervous flyer, pick a seat in the middle of the cabin if possible. Turbulence mostly affects the front and rear parts of the cabin. The middle section, which is over the wings, doesn't get shaken that much. Imagine the plane like a big teeter-totter. Similar principle when it comes to turbulence. Choosing a window seat, you get an opportunity to see how the airplane wings flex and flap. They're designed to move this way. If the wings were stiff, they would snap off once turbulence hit the plane. Well, that's comforting. In most cases, turbulence only drops you a couple of feet down, even though it might feel as if you're falling from the top of the Empire State Building. Woohoo! If the turbulence is strong enough for pilots to ask flight attendants to sit down, the plane can go 10 to 20 feet down. The most extreme white-knuckled turbulence is super rare, but it can make the plane drop 100 feet.
Disneyland's airspace has the protection level of the White House and the Kennedy Space Center. It's prohibited to fly over the theme park without a special waiver. The restriction was introduced in 2003 for security reasons, so now you will never see a plane or even a single drone flying over the park. Disneyland staff invented two unique colors, go-away green and blending blue. They are specifically designed to make the guests' eyes ignore them. Go-away green is used to color backstage buildings, to erase them from the guest's field of vision, and camouflage all the temporary construction works going on. The idea is that if you don't look for these objects specifically, your eyes will glaze over all the things painted in this color. Instead, you'll focus on something more important, like attractions and finished buildings. Maybe you'll even leave the park without realizing there was some construction going on in front of your eyes. Blending blue is used to make the buildings blend in with the sky. Many buildings have their upper part painted into this special shade, so they don't look as tall as they are. For the park in Florida, the color was adjusted to make it match Florida's regular sky shade. Go Away Green and Blending Blue are often used together to paint the buildings that Disneyland doesn't want you to see. The bottom part of the building is usually painted with Go Away Green until about the height of trees, and the rest is painted in blue to blend with the sky and make the building less noticeable. As a result, you mostly enjoy the beautiful attractions and Disney magic. Disneyland also uses colors and forced perspective to make some buildings appear bigger than they are. One of those buildings is the Sleeping Beauty's castle. The bricks used at the top of the castle are smaller than the ones at the bottom, and so the castle appears taller. They use scents as well to make the park more appealing. Around the park, there are many odor-pumping machines hidden inside the buildings. These smells are important because they contribute to your Disneyland experience, making it more pleasurable and memorable. People say that several places in Disneyland have very distinctive smells that are as familiar as the buildings. People aged 14 and older aren't allowed to wear costumes in Disneyland. You can only wear some Disney-inspired accessories, like Minnie Mouse ears or a Frozen t-shirt. If you wear the full costume, you won't be allowed to enter the park until you change. This is done so that guests don't confuse you with the cast members of Disneyland who represent the characters. It can become hard and confusing to find the actual Disney Cinderella if there are a couple of dozen fake ones walking around the park. But if you really want to dress up like your favorite character, you can take your trip to Disneyland during the Halloween season. During this time, it's perfectly fine to walk around like you just walked out of a Disney movie. Only remember that, due to safety reasons, your costume can't reach the ground or drag on it. Also, if it happens that someone confuses you with a Disney character, you can't pretend to be one, take pictures, or give autographs. Disneyland has banned selfie sticks, so don't pack one. They're on the list of prohibited items, along with drones. Remember, nothing can fly over Disneyland. Large tripods, and remote control toys. This is again done for safety, after one guest pulled out a selfie stick in the middle of a ride. Also, people used to drop them on rides, which is unsafe. Another item on the ban list is a folding chair. It's cool to have one and be able to arrange a seating place anywhere, especially while waiting in line. But leave it at home and enjoy Disneyland's benches instead. No one will let you in with a chair. If your friend is celebrating their birthday in Disneyland and you came with a gift, remember that the gift shouldn't be wrapped. The security person has to see what the gift is to make sure it's nothing that's prohibited in the park, so they'll make you unwrap it. All the cast members have to keep their job a secret. If a staff member plays a certain Disney character in the park, they're not allowed to tell it to anyone, reveal their character, or discuss their role with anyone but with other cast members. To get around this rule, staff members can tell their friends and relatives that they're friends with the character they actually play. Also, it's not allowed to write about their job on social media, take any photos in any costume, or any backstage photos, and especially post them anywhere, all to preserve the Disney magic. Cast members should take their job seriously and be the best character actor they can. After a person is hired, they undergo mandatory training to learn how to be the character they will portray. Also, they can't choose themselves what character they will play. It's decided for them. After getting the role, they have to watch movies with the character hundreds of times, learn their story, and learn to talk and behave exactly like them. Whatever happens, cast members must stay in character every second they're working. Whatever they do, they should do it like their character. Chip and Dale act goofy all the time. Maleficent should act mean, and Ariel constantly makes references to the ocean. All the Disneyland staff should also be able to answer any question a guest might ask correctly. This means that the actors should live in the universe of the character completely, and it's forbidden to mention any characters that were not in the original story, or to show that they know anything about life outside of Disneyland. If you ask them what their favorite social media app is, they will ask you what social media is. Also, cast members are trained to give autographs. Every Disney character has their own unique autograph, and even though there are different people portraying these characters, the autograph should always look the same. If you compare one you got today with the one you got 5 years ago, it should be the same, as if the same person gave it to you. What makes the whole thing harder for the staff is that one actor can portray several characters. Usually, each person portrays 2 or 3 characters, which means they have to undergo special training for each of them and be able to switch roles pretty quickly. One day, you're sweet Snow White, and the next, you're the fearless and independent Merida. To make their guests' experience as pleasurable as possible, the staff does a great job keeping the park clean. Every staff member, no matter who they are, a gardener, Goofy, or Princess Aurora, should pick up every piece of trash they see along the way. Of course, they should do it gracefully and nonchalantly, so nobody even pays attention to it. And guess what? They undergo special training to pick up trash like a true Disney character. To preserve the magic and not ruin the guest's experience with unpleasant things and mentions, employees also use a secret language. They use many codes so that guests don't hear what they're not supposed to hear. Code 101 means that something isn't functioning, and Code 102 is used when everything's back to normal. Don't be too flattered if some cast member calls you a treasured guest. People do misbehave in Disneyland, often trying to provoke the staff, but cast members must stay in character, even if it's hard to do. If some guest causes a lot of trouble and is very irritating, a staff member can refer to them as a treasured guest to let off some steam or to warn their coworker about the person's attitude. Also, if someone is being especially rude, they can be politely but insistently seen out of Disneyland by security. People who misbehave, for example, someone who tries to cut a power line or breaks some ride rules, can be banned from the park for a year. In case of more serious offense, the park management can even ban a person from visiting both Disneyland and Disney World indefinitely. In Disneyland, all staff members call each other by their first names, but if there are several people working at the same place and bearing the same names, it can get confusing. So, if there's already one girl working at Disneyland whose name is Ava, when another Ava joins the team, the new girl will get a temporary replacement name. She will wear a tag with her new name while at work and will be called that the entire time she's there. We'll start our top 10 with the smallest plane in the world, the Star Bumblebee. It was built specifically to set a world record and get this title. Its wingspan is smaller than the average person's height, and the length of the plane is the same as a regular sedan. But this baby can surprise you. Its maximum speed is similar to a supercar, 190 miles per hour. Still, it has only risen in the air a few times, and it even had to make an emergency landing. But no one was injured, and the restored plane was given to a private collection. By the way, the cost of building one Star Bumblebee was about $10,000, so it was really a regular sedan among the planes, one that could only carry one person. Next on the list is a Cessna 172. This airplane is also a record breaker, not for its size this time, but for the number of built units. To date, more than 45,000 aircraft have been built, and it remains in production since 1956. As for its size, its length can be compared with the length of a limousine, and the wingspan is a little less than a school bus. Far fewer people can board it though, only the pilot plus 3 passengers. In 1959, this aircraft set a world record for the duration of a refueling flight. 2 pilots took off at a Las Vegas airport and landed there in 64 days, 22 hours, and 19 minutes. Without refueling, the latest Cessna model can fly 800 miles. It's like the distance from San Francisco to Las Vegas and back. We move on to larger and more powerful aircraft. Embraer Legacy 600. It's slightly longer than a subway car, but much more comfortable. Figures. After all, it's a private aircraft worth $25 million. But if you want one, then be prepared to pay an additional $500,000 to $1 million a year just for plane maintenance. Now this plane is similar to a beluga whale in its shape. Actually, that's what it's called. Airbus A300-600ST Beluga. It's designed to carry aircraft parts and external cargo. It's also transported space shuttles. It looks like a mother airplane carrying her baby. Beluga was the one who transported the Columbus module for the ISS. Its length is like 2 baseball fields and almost the same wingspan. Its cargo bay is so big that it can easily accommodate the fuselage of another plane. Amazingly, it only takes 2 people to fly such a huge machine. But despite the size of its cargo compartment, Beluga can lift no more than 47 tons, or 30 hippos, whatever they prefer on board. Its cost is about 180 million euros. It's almost like a fleet of 600 Cessnas. Boeing 787 Dreamliner. It's one of the most efficient aircraft in the world. This airplane holds the record for the longest flight without refueling. In March 2020, it flew from Papeete to Paris. The plane flew without landing for almost 16 hours and covered a distance of over 9,700 miles. This is like the distance from New York to Los Angeles 4 times. The cost of this big guy is estimated at $300 million. This is like 30 of the most expensive Rolls-Royces or 30 million cinema tickets. Hughes H-4 Hercules. This is actually a flying boat, and it was made of wood. It's the biggest flying boat ever built, and it had an enormous wingspan, 321 feet. To get this thing in the air, 8 propeller engines were used, each with 3,000 horsepower. And even though this water monster was built in 1947, it could lift more cargo than the modern Airbus Beluga. Hercules could lift a weight of 59 tons. That's like a modern tank, or about 30 SUVs. But originally, it was built to transport about 750 people at a time. Still, the payload and maximum speed of this aircraft remain an issue. This wooden guy has only made 1 flight in its life. It climbed to a height of about 65 feet and flew 1.2 miles above Los Angeles Harbor. Despite this, engineer Howard Hughes kept this monster in working condition for almost 30 years, spending about $1 million per year. Airbus A380. This is the largest passenger plane in the world. It has 2 decks and can accommodate about 850 passengers. It's like a population of a small village, all on board one airplane. To accommodate this many passengers, it has an impressive size. Its length is almost as much as a soccer field, as is its wingspan, and its height is more than a 7-story building. On top of all this, the Airbus can travel incredible distances without refueling. It can take off in Iceland and land on the tip of South America. The only disadvantage of A380 is its price, $445 million. With this money, you can buy 4 private islands in the British Virgin Islands. A Saudi prince once bought one of these and modified it into a private aircraft. Now, it looks like an expensive mansion or hotel inside. It has become the largest and most expensive private jet. It's estimated to cost about $500 million. Oh, and by the way, just to take off, this giant needs a runway of almost 10,000 feet. So not all airports in the world can take an Airbus A380. Scaled Composites Model 351 Stratolaunch. An unusual name for an aircraft, but its appearance is even more bizarre. This aircraft bears the title of the longest wingspan in aviation history of all time, 385 feet. This is more than the length of a soccer field, plus a limousine. The pilot, co-pilot, and flight engineer are in the right fuselage cockpit. The cockpit of the left fuselage is used as a storage unit. 6 powerful engines help this giant take off, and 8 racks with a total number of 28 wheels help the big guy to land. Stratolaunch was designed to launch Pegasus rockets from it, but now it's going to be used to launch hypersonic flights. Well, whatever its purpose, pilots will have to be careful because so far there's only one Stratolaunch Model 351 in the world. Jumbo Jet, or Boeing 747. This is the world's first long-haul double-deck aircraft. This baby held the title of the heaviest and most capacious aircraft for 36 years, until Airbus A380 appeared. Its wingspan is more than the length of a hockey field, and its length is 250 feet, which is equal to the height of 15 giraffes. This aircraft set a record for the number of passengers on one flight. During a rescue operation in Ethiopia, there were 1,086 people on board the 747. This plane was also used to transport the President of the United States, or his First Lady. In this case, the aircraft was assigned a call sign, Air Force One, or Air Force One Foxtrot. And the cargo version of this plane was used for transportation of the space shuttle from reserve airfields to the place of its launch at Cape Canaveral. Antonov AN-225 Maria is the heaviest aircraft ever built. It also has the largest wingspan of any aircraft in operational service. The distance between the tips of its wings is almost like the length of a soccer field, and its body length is 275 feet. This is like 6 school buses in a row. Naturally, it's a powerlifter among planes. In 2009, Antonov was listed in the Guinness Book of Records for lifting the heaviest monocargo in aviation history, 187 tons. That's like 1,000 of the smallest aircraft in the world, the Star Bumblebee, or 4 Boeing 737s. But the absolute record for Antonov's lifting capacity is 253 tons. This is like half the tallest building in the world, the Burj Khalifa. Well, the records of this aircraft are quite long. Since its first flight, the AN-225 has set 240 world records. This is a unique case in aviation, and is in fact a record itself. This thing is not exactly an airplane, but it deserves a place on our list. The Caspian Sea Monster. It was an experimental wing ship. That means it used air force reflected from the surface of the earth or water to stay in the air. Formally, it was a ship, as it could fly at an altitude of only a few meters. But it looked more like an amphibian, and only pilots could fly it. A pretty complicated system, right? For a long time, it was the heaviest plane in the world. When it was empty, it weighed 240 tons. That's like 60 elephants. And it took 10 engines to get this thing in the air, 5 on each side. But it still had enough speed to get from New York to Washington in half an hour. You unbuckle your seatbelt and stand up, stretching your legs after a long flight. You head towards the restroom and think about freshening up. Suddenly, you're in the air. Luggage flies around you. It feels like the world is ending. You're 30,000 feet above the ground, and you're heading for a crash landing. Before you have any more time to think, everything goes black. In early 2001, a massive Boeing 747 carrying over 400 people took off from Tokyo Haneda International Airport. The flight progressed like normal until it reached 39,000 feet and coasting speed. Food was being served, and passengers were up and about like they would be on any other journey. Slightly earlier in the day, a Japanese airline flight between Busan, South Korea, and Tokyo, Japan, had begun in a similar fashion. This one was smaller, with about 250 people on board. It had also started coasting at around 37,000 feet. Both of these planes were on a similar flight path, only 2,000 feet apart, and due to meet over the Japanese island of Honshu. They were both close to this intersection when the pilot of the Boeing 747 noticed his anti-collision indicator going off. This was when he first knew something was wrong. One of the critical aspects of modern air travel is the coordination of air traffic control. Every flight is monitored, and pilots are advised if anything goes wrong. The entire point of air traffic control is to organize flights so well that collisions are impossible. Every modern plane is built with collision monitors, but they are never supposed to be used because of this. While the anti-collision indicators buzzed, 26-year-old trainee Hideki Hachitani was sitting behind the radars at the control tower, monitoring both flights. The stress of having to oversee more than 10 planes was overwhelming him. This isn't surprising, given that he wasn't even certified to operate by himself without supervision. When he noticed the potential collision, he rushed to prevent a disaster. He quickly contacted the flight from Busan that was cruising at 37,000 feet and told them to dip lower, trying to create a bigger gap between the planes. In his rush, though, Hachitani had made a terrible mistake. He had contacted the wrong plane. Instead of telling the Boeing 747 to reduce its altitude, the pilot of the other plane followed Hachitani's instructions and lowered from 39,000 feet to 37,000 feet, the exact same height as the 747. Both planes sped toward each other at 500 miles per hour on a collision course. Hachitani was beginning to panic now. When he noticed that the flight from Busan hadn't descended, he quickly instructed it to turn right. The pilot had, of course, failed to follow the instructions given because they'd been sent to the wrong plane. For an unknown reason, the instruction to turn right failed to reach anyone at all this time. The communications from air traffic control were failing, and the pilots didn't have any idea of how much danger they were in. When seeing Hachitani panicking behind the control panel, his supervisor rushed to the scene and took control of the situation. She contacted the flight from Busan and now told it to climb up. Amazingly, when she did this, she gave the order to a flight that wasn't even operating that day. Both of the flights ignored her because they didn't know that the message was intended for them. The Boeing pilot was at least aware that there was another plane close by, but his faith in air traffic control would have comforted him. Surely, if anything was badly wrong, someone would send him more instructions? At this point, the crash was beginning to look inevitable. For the passengers on the flights, though, everything would have seemed to be normal. They might have been eating some snacks, stretching their legs, or maybe waiting in line for the toilet, completely unaware that they were on course to fly straight into another plane. Luckily for all of the 600-plus people involved, the pilot was well-trained and confident in a situation that would cause most people to freeze up. Through his windscreen, he saw something that no pilot should ever see: another plane heading directly for him. With cat-like reflexes and remarkable composure, the Boeing pilot gripped the throttle and steered the plane down as low as he could for the seconds he had before the collision. The Boeing flew straight underneath the other flight. Imagine being a pilot and seeing the ground in front of you instead of the sky. They both made it out intact. This man had saved the lives of more than 600 people. That isn't to say that everyone got out without a scratch. The passengers were completely unaware of the entire incident, so barely any were buckled in. They were powerless as the change in direction threw them against the inside of the plane. Out of nowhere, with the plane's sudden movement, many hit the roof with the force of a car crash. Every unsecured object and person were thrown through the air. Some might have even felt like the plane had just hit the ground. Miraculously, only 7 passengers and 2 crew members were seriously injured, and the rest only received minor injuries. The pilot circled back to Tokyo to allow all of the injuries to be treated. Thanks to the quick response of medical teams and unbelievable decision-making and skill shown by the pilot, everyone on the flight survived. Every time you travel on a plane, you're signing up to shoot through the sky at speeds of up to 500 miles per hour in a fragile metal shell. You're surrounded by enormous, dangerous motors, 6 or 7 miles above the ground. Surely there's no way you'd survive if the plane itself started to fail. The Hudson Bay landing shows that skilled pilots can overcome seemingly insurmountable odds. On January 15, 2009, Flight 1549 was set to fly from New York to North Carolina. The pilot, Chesley Sullenberger, was a former jet pilot who converted to commercial flights in the 1980s. The sky was clear and the conditions were favorable. It was a typical flight for all of the 155 passengers on board, until the worst happened just a minute and a half in. As the plane climbed to 3,000 feet, they hit a flock of Canada geese. They hit the entire plane, but most importantly, Some geese got caught in both engines. When Sullenberger realized that his engines were failing, he contacted air traffic control. They ordered him to land back at the airport, but he realized that it was impossible. With failing engines and no clear runway to land on, he had to take control of the situation to save the lives of everyone on board. Without full control of his plane, he wasn't able to operate at the normal altitude. He flew so low that he passed over the George Washington Bridge at only 900 feet. The people on the bridge were terrified to see the plane so close, but they had no idea how bad things were on board. With the plane speeding at 140 miles per hour, Sullenberger saw the Hudson River in front of him, and he had no choice but to land on it. Everyone in the control tower was shocked to hear what he had to do, but there was no other option. Landing on a runway is one thing, but commercial pilots aren't trained to land in a river. Sullenberger had to think clearly and plan the landing while flying towards the ground. He made sure to allow the tail to touch the water before the nose. Landing nose first would compromise the engines further and cause even more damage. Amazingly, the plane touched down on the water without falling apart. Their momentum gradually decreased until they were at a slow, steady pace across the surface. From a distance, people might have thought it was just a slow-moving boat. A ferry arrived impressively quickly to fetch the stranded passengers, who waited on the wings and the inflatable slides. Everyone received minor injuries from the collision with the river, but they all survived. Captain Sullenberger went down in history as one of the most remarkable pilots ever, having saved so many people from a seemingly hopeless situation. There was even a movie made about his heroics.
Now, in most cases, turbulence only drops you a couple of feet down, even though it might feel as if you're falling from the top of the Empire State Building. Yeah, you better buckle up. If the turbulence is strong enough for pilots to ask flight attendants to sit down, the plane can go 10 to 20 feet down. The most extreme white-knuckle turbulence is super rare, but it can make the plane drop 100 feet down. Ride 'em, cowboy! Yee-haw! The average cruising altitude of most commercial airplanes is only 7% of the distance to space. Airplanes can trigger lightning, really. When an aircraft is flying through a cloud, the friction creates static electricity. It can cause a bolt of lightning. Luckily, it's not dangerous for modern planes. On average, lightning strikes every commercial jet at least once a year. Shocking. On airplanes, the captain sits in the left seat and the co-pilot in the right. The reasons for that are historical. One theory goes like this. The first European air forces were recruited from cavalry officers. They used to wear swords on their left side and mount horses from the left. This way they avoided getting their feet tangled. That's why later it was more familiar for them to board the plane from the left, hopefully not while still mounted on their horses. Another theory involves trains. The first international air route connected London and Paris, and while performing this flight, pilots navigated by following the railroad. History has it that once, when the weather was especially bad, two planes collided because both of them were flying over the tracks. After that, it was agreed each aircraft would fly to one side of the railroad track, on the right, and the pilot had to sit on the left side closer to the oncoming airplane. It helped them to estimate the needed clearance. Alright, so who'd want to sit in the left seat if that's where the biggest danger is? It doesn't say. By the way, these days, both seats have full control of the plane, and there are no regulations that would specify which seat the captain and the co-pilot should occupy. Maybe it's just rock, paper, scissors. As for helicopter pilots in command, they usually, but not always, sit on the right. Copters are more unstable than airplanes. That's why pilots prefer not to let go of the control stick. This stick controls the helicopter's direction and altitude. The control stick sits between the pilot's knees, and they use their right hand to hold onto it. The pilot's left hand moves the lever that changes the blade's pitch and presses other buttons on the central console. The fastest commercial airplane ever produced, the Concorde, could fly at almost twice the speed of sound. It held the record for the fastest transatlantic flight. It took the speedy jet 3 hours to get from New York's JFK to London's Heathrow. An extra seat behind the pilot and the co-pilot in the cockpit is for flight attendants during takeoff and landing, or for inspectors who monitor the flight. This seat is also called a jump seat because when you get up from it, it folds up right away. Or in case of trouble, you can jump out first. Not really. Modern planes have a special system that detects other aircraft, mountains, and different solid objects in their path. 10 miles away from another plane, and a voice starts to chant, "Traffic, traffic." 5 miles closer, and the same voice begins to give the pilots directions. "Turn right, turn right." And after the pilots drink a lot of coffee, it chants, "Bathroom, bathroom." Nah, I made that one up. Airplanes can safely operate with one engine, even during takeoff and landing. Both engines failing at the same time is almost unheard of. But even then, a plane wouldn't drop from the sky like a rock. Pilots would still have at least 20 minutes to find a suitable place to land. Voyager was the first plane to fly around the world without refueling or stopping. It happened in 1986. The flight continued for 9 days, 3 minutes, and 44 seconds. Bathroom, bathroom. The average cruising altitude is 35,000 feet. But if our planet was as big as a globe, planes would fly just 1/10 of an inch off its surface. Just imagine the legroom. Boeing 747 consists of more than 6 million parts, assembly required. Each of its engines weighs almost 9,000 pounds, 2.5 times as heavy as the average car. Each one costs around $8 to $10 million. Planes can land even if their wheels are broken or the landing gear is stuck. Then the pilots just skid the plane's belly down the tarmac. If everything's done correctly, such landings are quite safe, according to somebody. The first powered flight ever took place in North Carolina. Yay, Orville and Wilbur had the right stuff. Their gasoline-powered biplane, driven by propeller, was in the air for 12 seconds and covered the distance of 120 feet. And that's only half the distance of the wingspan of the largest passenger airliner these days. The Airbus A380 has wings that spread for more than 260 feet. A hard landing that makes your face turn white isn't necessarily the sign of an inexperienced pilot. In some conditions, a gentle touchdown is dangerous. For example, when the runway is wet, a plane has to touch down firmly. This way, it breaks the water surface and avoids hydroplaning. A hard touchdown is also necessary when the runway is too short. It improves the plane's braking capability. Mercury isn't allowed on planes. Even a tiny amount of this liquid metal can damage the aluminum aircraft bodies are made of. Mercury eagerly combines with aluminum. Then it harms the protective layer that prevents the metal from corrosion. By the way, Venus and Mars are prohibited too. The verdict is still out on Uranus. The co-pilot is as experienced and capable of flying a plane as the captain. It's a common situation when the captain flies the plane to its destination and the co-pilot drives it on the way back. Choosing a window seat, you get an opportunity to see how the airplane wings flex and flap. They're designed to move this way. If the wings were stiff, they would snap off once turbulence hit the plane. Well, that's comforting. Before takeoff and landing, flight attendants usually flip a small switch on the bathroom door. This prevents it from flying open when it's not supposed to. Good thing. With the same ease, a flight attendant can open the door when someone is inside. At night, pilots can't see other airplanes clearly and have to rely on electronics. To make it less confusing, every aircraft has a green light on its right wing and a red light on the left one. It helps other pilots to figure out which direction the plane's facing and where it's going, and if you're going to hit it. Airplane constructors make the cabin look more spacious by painting it white. Its special wall structure also reflects light, which visually expands the space. The illumination between the ceiling and overhead bins makes the ceiling look higher. All this helps people with claustrophobia to deal with being in an enclosed space for hours. When an airplane has a wider entrance and is bright inside, passengers believe their meals taste better and their seats are wider. But the only thing that's different is their surroundings. Limited amounts of oxygen on the plane affects passengers' mood. This makes most people get overly emotional. About 41% of people admit to having cried while watching an in-flight movie. And 55% confess they feel more emotional when they're flying. Modern plane toilets are vacuum-powered. Yes, they officially suck. When you flush, negative air pressure outside pulls everything that's inside the bowl into a holding tank, usually in the tail of the plane. One flush uses around a half a gallon of water. The BD-BD-5 Micro holds the Guinness World Record for being the smallest and lightest jet aircraft. The plane can seat one person and weighs 10 times less than the average car. In the 1970s, when the plane was produced, it cost about $2,500. If you're a nervous flyer, pick a seat in the middle of the cabin if possible. Turbulence mostly affects the front and rear parts of the cabin. The middle section, which is over the wings, doesn't get shaken all that much. Bathroom. The pressurized air in the passenger cabin is as dry as in the Sahara Desert. It has about 20% humidity. A humidifier could solve this problem by adding some moisture, but it would be an extra load and cost airlines tons of money. Plus, the aircraft body is mostly made of aluminum and other metals. Humid air might lead to corrosion. Pilots are tested every 6 to 8 months. They use flight simulators and practice all kinds of emergencies. After that, examiners assess them. Safety and technical tests and medical examination also take place regularly. The Boeing 747-8, one of the world's largest commercial airplanes, has enough electrical capacity to power almost 500,000 flat-screen TVs. And the first airline that offered its customers online check-in was Alaska Airlines. That happened in 1999. In the beginning, this system was available to a limited number of passengers and worked only for selected flights. And now, everyone who is flying has the same opportunity to lose their electronic boarding passes.
Have you ever watched an action-packed Hollywood film where an airplane gets a hole in its side, and everyone starts freaking out? Stuff starts flying all over the place and people are barely staying in their seats. Well, in real life, a small hole in the plane's body isn't going to cause that much drama. However, I have an incredible story to tell you about a pilot who actually managed to land a plane with half of its roof missing. Can you believe it? Make sure your seatbelt is fastened because this one is going to be a wild ride. On April 28, 1988, a Boeing 737 owned by Aloha Airlines took off from Hilo International Airport en route to Honolulu. Before this flight, the plane had already flown 3 short trips from Honolulu to Hilo, Maui, and Kauai. Everything was chill that day, and the weather was nice and calm. It looked like smooth sailing all the way. The captain of the flight was Robert Schornsteimer, and the co-pilot was Madeline Tompkins, both experienced pilots with thousands of flight hours in the Boeing 737. Bright and early that morning, before taking off from Honolulu, Madeline did the regular pre-flight inspection and said that everything was good to go. At 11 a.m., they took off from Honolulu and went to Maui, then Hilo. When they got to Hilo, they didn't leave the cockpit or check the plane from the outside. It wasn't a requirement, so why bother? At 1:25 p.m., the plane took off for the final leg of the round trip, with 95 people on board. 89 passengers, 2 pilots, 3 flight attendants, and an FAA traffic controller who sat in the observer seat in the cockpit. The plane had taken off like normal and reached its cruising altitude of 24,000 feet without any hiccups. But then, 26 miles from Kahului, things went totally haywire. The pilots heard a loud whooshing sound, followed by a crack. and then a rush of wind that was so loud it was deafening. Turns out, a small section of the roof on the left side had come loose, causing the plane to decompress explosively. And to make matters even worse, the decompression caused a chain reaction that led to a huge chunk of the plane's roof ripping off completely. That missing part was a massive 18.5 feet long and was part of the skin that covered the plane from the cockpit all the way back to the forewing area. The pilots didn't have a clue what was going on when the disaster struck. The first officer, who was the one in charge of the plane at that time, suddenly felt her head snap back, and then she saw a bunch of gray insulation and debris flying around the cockpit like it was a tornado. Meanwhile, the captain took a look around and was shocked to see that the cockpit door was nowhere to be seen, and instead of the first-class ceiling, he was staring straight up at the sky. The plane started to tilt from side to side, making it challenging to keep it under control. The crew in the cockpit quickly put on their oxygen masks, and the captain took over control of the plane. He then initiated an emergency descent towards the nearest airport on Maui Island. Luckily, all the passengers were seated, and most of them had their seatbelts fastened since the seatbelt sign was still on. Unfortunately, the 3 flight attendants were caught off guard. One of them was near the hole and was pulled out of the plane. The other 2 were thrown to the floor, with one of them hitting her head hard and losing consciousness. The third attendant tried to help the passengers and keep them calm. At the same time, the pilots were desperately trying to let air traffic control know that they were in trouble. But there were communication problems even between themselves due to the loud noise and the fact that they were wearing oxygen masks. They had to resort to hand signals to understand each other. Moreover, they were unsure whether their messages were being heard by ATC. The plane's controls were not responding properly, which made the captain's job of flying the plane even harder. The first officer was doing her best to assist the captain and communicate with the tower. It was only after the plane descended to an altitude of 14,000 feet that the controller finally received their distress call and immediately started making arrangements for an emergency landing. The control tower wasn't prepared for a situation like this, though. In fact, the tower had to call 911, just like any other regular person would do in case of an emergency. The problem was that the controller didn't understand the severity of the situation, and they didn't realize that the passengers and crew members would need medical help. This was because the crew had only reported a rapid decompression and hadn't explained the entire situation in detail. The plane was in a very bad mess, but the captain was doing everything he could to safely land the plane. As they descended towards the airport, the captain commanded the first officer to lower the landing gear, but the indicator light didn't turn on. The plane also had an issue with the left engine, which failed as they approached the runway. Despite these problems, the captain used the reverse thrust of the working engine to try and land the plane. It was a difficult and dangerous task, but they managed to land the plane safely on the runway. The passengers and crew members were then evacuated from the plane. It was a miracle that everyone survived. However, 65 people were injured. They had been hit by debris and pieces of the plane's body that were flying around. Unfortunately, the ground staff wasn't aware of the severity of the situation and didn't have enough resources to provide immediate medical assistance to the injured passengers. The first ambulance arrived 7 minutes after the plane landed, which wasn't an ideal scenario. Furthermore, there were only 2 ambulances on the entire island, which couldn't accommodate all the injured people. As a result, tour vans were used to transport the passengers to the hospital. Fortunately, 2 drivers who were former paramedics provided immediate first aid to the injured right on the runway. Meanwhile, the airport mechanics and office staff took the vans to the hospital, which was located 3 miles away. Despite the chaotic and stressful circumstances, only 8 people suffered severe injuries, but they all later made a full recovery. The plane was in really bad shape though, and it was no wonder it couldn't handle the stress of the decompression incident. Despite its age not being a problem, it had experienced a whole lot of takeoffs and landings, which took a toll on its integrity. The salty and humid environment it operated in only added to the damage. You see, planes are designed to withstand a certain number of flight cycles, and this plane had exceeded that number by a long shot. The majority of its flights were short domestic ones, which meant it had to take off and land way more times than it was designed for. This is what ultimately led to the roof coming off during the flight. The poor condition of the plane meant that it was beyond repair and had to be dismantled right there at the airport. What's interesting is that in an interview after the accident, one passenger recalled that she had noticed a crack in the plane's fuselage while she was boarding. She didn't tell the flight crew about it because she didn't think it was worth it, so they didn't know to check it. It's important to remember that these types of accidents are very rare nowadays. Major airlines and airports take numerous steps to ensure safety. And according to Harvard University, the chances of being in an airplane accident are about 1 in 1.2 million. That's a tiny percentage, and I don't know about you, but I find that very comforting. And even if something did happen, such as the roof of the plane coming off, it's reassuring to know that the pilots are trained to handle emergencies and can still land the plane safely.
Welcome aboard our flight from London to Miami. It will take us 4 hours and 30 minutes. The weather in Miami is... Wait, did the pilot just say 4 hours and a half? It sounds like a dream, but it will most likely become our reality in less than 10 years from now. Boom Supersonic, an aircraft manufacturer, is working on a passenger supersonic jet called the Overture that will be able to carry 65 to 80 people at twice the speed of current commercial aircraft. One of the major American airlines is interested in buying around 40 planes. The plane that's going to cost $200 million has recently passed the wind tunnel tests. If all goes well, the first finished Overture prototype will roll off the line in 2025 and will travel at nearly twice the speed of sound. The plane will be able to show its top speed over the sea, so it should be ideal for transatlantic flights. And then, traveling from, say, New York to Paris should take no longer than 4 hours. But first, it will have to get all the official permissions to do it. Some people are skeptical about the whole passenger superjet concept as they remember the story of the Concorde. That high-end plane delivered people from London to New York in about 3 hours and serviced other transatlantic connections. The tickets cost a whopping $10,000 per seat, and passengers got access to a super exclusive lounge with lobster and Angus beef for lunch. The Concorde went on its final commercial flight in 2003. It was a huge fuel guzzler. Plus, there are many complaints from people living near airports about the noise it produced. The Overture is supposed to be more fuel efficient, lighter, and have better software to make it more aerodynamic. The noise might still be a problem though, because supersonic aircraft need aerodynamic engines, which are pretty loud. That will definitely change in the future, as planes have gone a long way since their first flight in 1903. Back then, the Wright brothers started the aerial age with a 12-second flight traveling 120 feet in North Carolina. The top speed at that time was around 30 miles per hour, but it still seemed pretty impressive. The world's first passenger airline service took off just 11 years later. The flight from St. Petersburg, Florida to Tampa, Florida lasted 23 minutes. Covering the distance by car around the bay took about 20 hours, so that was a great time saver. The tickets cost $5 and were sold out 16 weeks in advance, but the airline went out of business in 4 months. The new age in aviation began in the 1950s when they introduced the turbofan engine. It became possible as they started using temperature-resistant materials and complex air cooling systems. Planes also became lighter as they were made of composite materials. The wings have also improved over the years. The airfoil, that's the part thanks to which the air travels faster above the wing than below it, became a real game changer. Thanks to it, the planes keep a low speed during takeoff, which means they move smoothly and burn less fuel. The fastest plane in the world so far is North American X-15. It was rocket-powered and made of aluminum and titanium. A huge wedge tail helped it stay stable at that super speed. The rocket plane set the world's altitude record, reaching an altitude of 67 miles. Oh, and to make it even more impressive, it happened back in 1967. So, if it was possible back then already, why don't we all just fly rocket planes? Or at least supersonics, especially on long-distance flights? In terms of speed, passenger planes are still where they were 50 years ago. Mostly because speeding flights up would also make them way more expensive. Flying faster means burning more fuel. Plus, supersonic engines are expensive to produce and maintain. Another reason is natural forces. The winds affect the speed of a plane, and no technology can control the wind. A strong tailwind can help it move forward at a higher speed, and a headwind can slow the aircraft down. Planes mostly fly at altitudes of up to 7 miles. Up there, the air is thinner, which means there's less resistance, and a plane can fly faster and save some fuel. Also, the lower temperatures make the jet engines more efficient. Another perk of flying through that part of the atmosphere is that it's less turbulent, so flights go smoother. Private jets can't fly that high. They're smaller, and their engines aren't strong enough to reach such an altitude, so they stick around to 15,000 feet. Ever notice those white trails that planes leave behind? Their official name is contrails, and they're like artificial clouds planes leave behind. When the plane reaches its cruising altitude, temperatures get quite low, about -67 degrees Fahrenheit, and the water turns into particles of ice. The higher the level of humidity is, the bigger those trails get, and you can see them long after the plane has disappeared. So, thick and long contrails can be a sign of an upcoming storm. Sometimes contrails can even be colorful. The droplets of water that are formed up in the atmosphere can freeze in different sizes. They all reflect sunlight at different wavelengths, causing the effect of a rainbow. When all the colors mix, it appears white, the most common contrail color. Airplanes don't take off with the wind, but actually against it. It's kinda like a kite. To make it fly, you launch it against the wind, and there it goes. That's because there are 4 forces of flight: lift, weight, thrust, and drag. The lift is generated because the speed of the air is higher above the kite than below it. The kite is pushed upwards. This is the lifting force. Going through a storm is one pretty scary experience, but is it really as dangerous as it seems? In fact, the most critical moments in windy weather are takeoff and landing. Plane manufacturers test their aircraft and specify speed limits at which the pilots should move in different weather conditions. At some airports, the winds are pretty severe all year round, so landing can get pretty wobbly. It requires a real pro of a pilot to land when the wind strikes the runway. Sometimes, the wind unexpectedly changes its speed and direction. The pilot really has to know what they're doing to land when the wind direction changes. Otherwise, the risk of overshooting the runway is pretty real. Extreme heat is another weather condition that can stop a plane from flying. Airplanes fly by generating lift with their wings. The air below the wings takes the plane up. In extreme heat, an airplane can't produce that much lift. That's because hot air expands and becomes way less dense than cold air. With less lift, the plane may find it really hard to take off and fly. Electronics will unlikely respond well to extreme heat or humidity, and the AC system may fail. Smaller jets can't operate at a temperature of over 118 degrees Fahrenheit. Larger Airbus and Boeing planes perform the best below 126 degrees Fahrenheit. Those mysterious chimes you hear during the flight are a kind of a secret language the crew uses to communicate with each other. The chime you hear shortly after takeoff informs the crew that the landing gear is getting retracted. A single chime during the flight is a sign that one of the passengers needs the assistance of the crew. When they're serving meals and run out of food and drinks, they can ask their colleagues to share, using a high and low chime combo. 3 low tones means serious turbulence is approaching, so the crew needs to buckle up. Have you ever noticed the flashing light in the cabin before takeoff? You have nothing to worry about. It occurs when the pilot disconnects a plane from the airport power supply and it switches to the onboard one. This rapid transition may cause flashing.
Pilots can't eat similar meals when they're working. Imagine that you're on a transoceanic flight. The airplane is flying over the Pacific Ocean. Flight attendants deliver the dinner meals. Everyone is enjoying the pasta. The sauce tastes a bit funny though. That's probably okay. After all, you are eating an aircraft meal. It can't taste like a 5-star chef plate. Time goes by. Oh no! You were right! Something was indeed wrong with the food. But if all the passengers have the same problem, so do the pilots. To prevent both of them being out of order, pilots are advised not to eat the same meal at the same time. In such a scenario, if one pilot feels bad, the other one can take over. I mean, this is not an imperative rule stated by the Federal Aviation Administration, but most airlines make their own rules about this matter. Flight attendants have access to hidden equipment, such as a defibrillator, supplemental oxygen, a fire extinguisher, and duct tape. But probably the most interesting gear they have is handcuffs. These objects are there to protect passengers from others, and sometimes from themselves. Turns out that flight attendants have everything they need to defuse a troublemaker. Aviator sunglasses look cool on pilots in movies, but in real life, they don't wear polarized glasses. First off, they have a glare-reducing effect. This can cause some trouble in the cockpit. A pilot has to read instruments, but the stuff in the cockpit, such as LCD displays, emits polarized light. So a pilot with those cool polarized glasses can't read the displays with 100% efficiency. Pilots shouldn't wear these glasses simply because of safety concerns. Imagine a shimmer of glare coming from another plane's windscreen, but the pilot missed the sign because of polarized sunglasses. Ever noticed a hole in the tail of an airplane? Well, most commercial airplanes have it. Next time you get into an airplane, take a closer look. The hole has a fancy name, auxiliary power unit. It looks like a hole from the outside, but that is actually a hidden turbine engine. Most of the time, the APU will remain off for the entire flight. It will start working when the plane lands. It provides power to the cabin lights, air conditioning, and cockpit electronics. Don't underestimate the APU's power, though. It can also provide the power required to start the main engines. You've watched a Brightside video and learned what the APU is. A perfect icebreaker. Unfortunately, you're not in a chatty mood. You just want to take the plane, land, and start your vacation. Yet again, there is only one door to board. You are at the end of a queue. Why don't planes generally have multiple doors? According to the experts, the biggest issue is that the bridge takes up a lot of space. When an aircraft is loaded from the front and the rear, it takes up 2 slots. This is not ideal for the administrators. Newly remodeled or constructed terminals tend to have dual boarding compared to the older terminals. Change of scenery, let's jump into a cruise ship. There are hidden passageways and secret doors in ships. These secrets are from an insider. Staff on the ship mostly work in their designated area. How does a worker get from one place to another without using the stairs and doors that the passengers use? There is a network of corridors and stairs all around the ship, used only by the crew. I mean it when I say secret doors. They blend with the walls, so they go undetected by those who don't know where the door is. Maybe you can stumble by accident. Here is a clue. Pay attention to the walls near the guest stairs. Try to think of those gigantic cruise ships as floating metals. This leads me to a cruise cabin fun fact. The walls of the cruise ship cabin are magnetic. Imagine you're traveling to multiple countries on board a cruise ship, a single-month voyage. You collect destination-themed magnets and decorate your cabin. True cruise fans know this magnet magic, so they put a couple of magnetic hooks into their luggage. Neat tip, use magnetic hooks to add extra storage in your cabin. Hang clothes and accessories, postcards, or hats. Speaking of ships, why do some ships and boats have small holes constantly releasing water? To keep the bilge free of water. Water builds up over time inside the bilge, and the bilge pump automatically pumps the water out again. Ships don't have headlights. Using a headlight could prevent accidents. If they work for cars, why not for ships? Headlights are the source of light, but the light that comes out of them bounces back at the light source at some point. With cars, for instance, headlights work because the area you want lit is narrow, and you can easily take action if you see an obstacle on the road. For ships, this is super hard. The light source should be powerful enough to light the area the captain wants to see. Large cargo ships, for instance, need more than a mile to stop or take action. Plus, imagine how much brighter should the ship's light be to light the whole area in front of it. They do see each other with different sorts of lights called navigation lights. These are small but practical. They arrange it in a standardized way so that ships could see each other. The exciting thing is that they don't just notice one another in the dark, they also understand each other's movements and directions. Here's an example. Imagine a ship with two nav lights. The one on the front is lower, near the ship floor. The other one on the back is high up. This means the vessel goes to the right. It can safely pass by the other ships without hitting them. Trains don't have seatbelts. A bit weird. Every time there is a crash related to trains, this matter comes up. Pretty much nowhere in the world seatbelts are used on trains. Various studies have been made about this issue. Some of them created simulations of accidents, and the results were surprising. Using a seatbelt on a train could potentially increase the number of injuries. In cars, seatbelts are highly effective in protecting the passenger and are used all the time. The logic behind the seatbelt is to protect the person when a collision causes rapid deceleration. But trains carry so much momentum that they don't stop rapidly. On a plane, passengers use a seatbelt on takeoff, during landing, and if turbulence occurs. There are no such things for trains. Entering and leaving a station is not a high risk. Experts believe focusing and making investments are other ways to improve railway safety. Now, you are traveling by train. You look outside the window. There are small stones along the railway tracks to accompany you on the journey. Those stones are formally known as track ballast. They do a very important job. They provide support to and maintain the tracks. They're not there by mere coincidence, though. Now look at the stones closer. You can notice that there is no single smoothly cut stone on the tracks, because they're not regular stones randomly poured at the rails. Each rock has sharp and abrupt edges. Sharp edges hold on to each other. They protect the railroad from harsh concussions. They facilitate water drainage in heavy rain and keep down the grass and other weeds. Now imagine replacing those with round pebbles. They will slide down. Eventually, the ballast will spread out and tracks will fall apart. The last thing you would want, especially if you were a passenger on that train.
It seems strange that a commercial jet doesn't have keys to turn it on. But it's a bit more complicated than just turning a key. Instead, there's a series of buttons and dials on the control board that starts the complicated process. A battery provides the power to the aircraft that is charged through a small electric generator within the jet's tail. Airflow gets in and moves into the jet's engines to keep them cool. A reserve power then warms the turbines by turning them slowly until they start spinning at the right rate. Then, the engines can be turned on, one at a time. With up to 4 engines on a commercial jet, this entire process can take up to 90 minutes. Planes don't have keys to lock the doors either, but when they sit idle, jets have security guards constantly monitoring them. But even if someone happened to get past them, it wouldn't be a quick getaway. When you enter the plane, the captain keeps a close eye on the boarding process. They are not only in command of the flight deck, but also of the passenger's cabin. To become a commercial pilot, you gotta have a distance vision of at least 20/20. But depending on the airline, it's sometimes okay if your perfect vision is assisted with glasses. It's time to find a seat on the plane. You checked in late, and you've already had an unpleasant experience of not getting on your flight like that in the past. This is because airlines purposely overbook their flights, just in case there are no-shows or cancellations. So, you didn't get to choose your seat this time. You walk past the front seats in jealousy. There are seats that are always taken much faster because everyone wants to leave the plane as soon as possible after it lands. But if you're choosing safety over early departure, the back is the place to be. It's estimated to be 40% safer in the rear end of the plane. Maybe you'd prefer to drive instead of flying? The chances of something dangerous happening to a plane during a flight are 1 in 11 million. Compare it to the likelihood of a car accident, which is 1 in 5,000. You've been placed at the emergency exit. Excellent, more legroom. Over the past 30 years, legroom has been decreasing more with every year. Up to 5 inches on some airlines. No, you haven't been getting taller. The reason behind this is the more people they're able to fit in, the more money the airline makes. Airlines don't build their own aircraft and use factory-made planes. From there, each airline will determine its own seating structure. This is also why the seats don't line up with the windows. But it doesn't matter. You have the best seat, although it's always a bit concerning when sitting next to an emergency door. What if you accidentally knocked it while asleep and opened it? Relax, it's actually impossible to open these doors while flying. The air pressure inside pushes against every square inch of the cabin. On the door itself, this pressure equates to 1,000 pounds across every square foot of the door. But even if you somehow developed Hulk-like strength in your sleep, you still wouldn't be able to open it as there's a series of electrical and mechanical devices that latch it closed. The extra measures are important as the moment the door opens, the entire cabin temperature would quickly drop, and that drastic change in pressure would weaken the plane's structure. It's time for takeoff, and they've asked you to turn your phone off. Should you really? 10% of people have admitted that they don't turn theirs off and don't even set them to airplane mode. Cell phones can cause issues, but they don't disrupt the electronics as you might believe. There is a genuine concern that while you're flying in the air, your phone can receive signals from multiple towers on the ground, providing stronger distractions for the pilots. So, let's make their job a little easier and turn it off. The plane has reached 40,000 feet, your ears have popped, and the seatbelt sign is turned off. The flight attendant walks down the aisle with their arms held outward. Within such a thin passage, they walk this way as it helps with their balance. They try to avoid disrupting passengers, so they don't use the headrest of the seats. And in case of sudden turbulence, there are special grabbing spots under the overhead luggage bay. It's estimated that 500,000 people are flying in the sky at any given time. So right now, you're part of that special group involving 0.1% of the world's population. You look out the window and notice the white wings. Planes are painted white and other lighter colors as well to help reflect solar radiation. This avoids damage from the sun by reducing the amount of heat the plane receives.
We'll be experiencing some turbulence.
But further in the distance, dark clouds approach and the plane is heading towards a thunderstorm. Since it's made of metal, it has to be a big electric conductor, right? Thankfully, jets are fitted with an aluminum shell that conducts electricity very well. The cabin's interior is completely shielded from lightning, protecting electrical systems and leaving us carbon-based mammals unhurt. A plane is so perfectly built for electrical storms that it's one of the safest places to be. There haven't been any major incidents from a storm since the 1960s. You're thirsty and you're aware that you should have brought your own water. When aircrafts land at each location, they refill their water supplies. The water quality in a plane is based on where they collected the vital liquid. Many things contribute to the water quality of every airport. Water cabinets, trucks, carts, and hoses all could be of different standards. In 2019, an airline water study found that most airlines weren't providing clean water, so the general recommendation is to only drink water from a sealed bottle and avoid even tea. But the food is perfectly fine. As you sit back down, you notice the cabin is cold. Super cold, to be honest. It's intentionally set to around 71 degrees Fahrenheit, for a good reason. When people become vulnerable to fainting, it's due to not receiving enough oxygen. And when there's warm air mixed with high cabin pressure, fainting becomes more common. So, while the cold air is helping those who need it, you've been provided with a blanket for your comfort. Warmed up with a blanket, you notice the dry air running through your nose, and it dehydrates your lips and eyes. But don't worry, the air is completely safe and very clean. 40% of the air is recycled and goes through a thorough cleaning system to remove all dust and airborne bacteria, and the other 60% comes from the outside. The humidity levels in the air get very low, and that's why you feel all that discomfort. It's now dark outside as the plane begins its descent to land, and the lights are dimmed. The dimmed lights aren't for the pilots or crew or those at the airport. They're for you. If something goes wrong while landing when it's dark, they'll have to start an emergency procedure. The dimmed lights are there to help your eyes adjust and help you follow towards the exit in the dark easier. But luckily, today, it won't be necessary, as your journey has come to an end. Is the sky like a desert? Can a commercial aircraft fly faster than the speed of sound? Can you fix a plane with a piece of tape? Let's check your intuition with this cool truth or myth airplane quiz. Make sure to note down your correct answers and share your score in the comments. So, the first one for you. Commercial airplanes are more fuel efficient than your car. True or false? That's actually true. Commercial flights have been more fuel efficient per person per mile than cars for more than a decade. Better technologies and a larger number of people that fit in one plane have decreased the energy intensity of traveling by air by almost 74%. As for cars, it's been just a 57% drop. Okay, how about this one? There's no row 13 on a plane. Well, come to think of it, I've never seen a 13A or any other letter on my boarding pass. What about you? That's true, but only partially. In those countries where the number 13 is considered unlucky, there's really no row 13. But in other countries, the missing number may differ depending on what is believed to bring bad luck there. Opening a plane door during the flight is a real safety risk. It sounds kinda terrifying to me, but is it true? You can relax, that's just a myth. For one thing, the doors are locked, but even if they weren't, no one can open the door of a flying plane. It's physically impossible. The cabin pressure won't allow anybody to do it. When an airplane is at cruising altitude, it's pressurized. The difference between the inside and outside is huge. In other words, the pressure inside the cabin pushes on the door and doesn't allow anyone to open it from the inside. Even better, the airplane door is called a plug door. Its inner edge is wider than the outer. That's why it acts like a bathtub drain stopper, corking the doorway without falling through. Your skin is drier on a plane than it would be in the middle of the Sahara Desert. Can you believe this? And if you think this is true, you're absolutely right. The airplane cabin is pressurized, and the humidity there is set to 20%. For comparison, in the Sahara Desert, the average air humidity is around 25%, and your skin is used to at least 40% of humidity. That's why your nose and throat feel so dry when you're flying. Several years ago, someone posted a photo on the internet that became viral in no time. In this image, there was an airline technician, and he seemed to be fixing a plane with duct tape. So the question is, could it be true? Or was it just a fake? The answer isn't so simple. It wasn't your regular duct tape, so partially, this fact is a myth. But it was some kind of tape, known as speed tape. It costs around $700 per roll. It's actually an aluminum adhesive you can use to temporarily mend minor damage, until you can repair it properly. Is it true that pilots avoid the Bermuda Triangle? After all, it has such a notorious reputation. Ships and planes simply disappear into thin air in this region. This one is certainly a myth. Today, people already know that there's no particular danger in the Bermuda Triangle, and planes fly over this area as usual. Airplanes mostly fly on their own, with autopilots doing all the work. Myth or truth? What's your bet? It's a widespread myth. Many people are sure that planes are some super automated mechanisms that can fly mostly by themselves, and pilots are there simply for backup. In reality, though, flying is a hands-on job. It needs constant attention and a skilled flight crew. There once was a plane that flew twice faster than the speed of sound. Can it be true, or is it too far-fetched? This fact is definitely not a myth. The Concorde could reach a speed of 1,330 miles per hour. That's much faster than the speed of sound, which is around 767 miles per hour. And that's indeed almost twice as slow as the Concorde. You might have heard this scary fact before. Planes empty toilets right in the air. Sounds alarming, but is it true? Fortunately, that's only a myth. There's absolutely nothing to this legend. Airplane toilets use a vacuum-based system to transport all the contents out of the bowl and into a special tank. It's located in the rear part of the aircraft, and this tank gets emptied only on the ground. This is a tricky one. When a plane is flying towards the east, it can reach higher speeds. So, can the speed really depend on the direction? And this is true. It's possible thanks to high-altitude winds known as jet streams. They blow at a speed of 100 to 300 miles per hour, and since our planet rotates from west to east, aircraft moving in the same direction can use these winds to move faster. Do you think pilots can control airflow to keep passengers sleepy and relaxed and save on fuel? This one is definitely a myth. If you ask a pilot this question, you might hear "ridiculous" in reply. The truth is that pressurization determines the oxygen level in the cabin. How about this one? The world's tallest air traffic control tower is as high as a skyscraper. Can it be true, or is it just an impressive myth? I know it's hard to believe, but it's actually true. When an airplane lands, it needs the assistance of runway lights and airport beacons. It's part of the responsibilities of the air traffic control tower. It also manages ground traffic. No wonder such construction needs to be extra tall. The new Bangkok International Airport in Thailand has a 430-foot tall tower. Its height is almost the same as the height of a 40-story building. It cost $18 million to build the tower. I've got another tough one for you. The sensitivity of your taste buds dropped by 30% during the flight. Yes or no? This is true. The pressure in the cabin combined with the dryness of the air kinda numbs your taste buds. But the most curious thing here is that this mostly affects salty and sweet flavors. If you're served something spicy or bitter, you can still taste it as usual. Airline caterers try to take the decreased sensitivity of your taste buds into account while preparing airplane meals. They have to modify lots of good old recipes to make your food taste better. As soon as your oxygen mask is on, in case the cabin is depressurized, you can relax and breathe out. You can still use it till the end of the flight. I wish it was true, but is it? Sadly, it's a myth. Passenger oxygen masks usually provide enough air to breathe normally for 10 to 15 minutes. In other words, it's just a temporary solution. But in most cases, this time is enough for the plane to go down to the altitude of 10,000 feet. That's where people can breathe without using oxygen masks. And since planes descend very fast, the need for additional oxygen lasts for a few minutes at most. By the way, the oxygen system gets tested regularly during special maintenance checks. Plus, both passengers' and pilots' oxygen flow doesn't depend on electricity. Masks use individual oxygen generators, so even if there's some electrical problem on board, the oxygen doesn't get cut off. Many people say that the plane is the safest means of travel, but do you believe in it? That's a myth. Flying is the second safest. Studies show that the elevator is safer. Unfortunately, it won't be able to take you to the Bahamas. Okay, this last one was kind of a joke. Statistically, planes are indeed the safest way to get to your destination. So, how many correct answers did you have? Tell me in the comments below. Me, 8. Duh.
The plane had been in the air for a mere 25 seconds when the pilots noticed weird noises and bizarre vibrations. They tried several ways to improve the situation, but nothing worked. The engine surges continued, and just over a minute into the flight, when the plane reached 3,000 feet, both engines failed. First the right one, 2 seconds later the left one. The pilots decided to return to the airport they had just left. At the same time, they tried to restart the engines. Nothing seemed to work. The flight crew made a decision to pitch the plane down and then level it off. Perhaps it could help them gain some speed for the glide. But soon, they realized they wouldn't make it to the airport. Was the plane going to crash? That's when the miracle at Gotrura occurred. The morning before the flight started as usual. Soon after midnight, a flight technician captain asked him to start planes.
You've probably seen Hollywood movies where somehow a small hole opens up in the side of a plane and then immediately it's utter chaos. Food trays and bags flying, seatbelts barely holding passengers in place. Luckily, in reality, small damage to the fuselage won't cause such dramatic consequences. But would you believe me if I told you there was a pilot that managed to land a plane with half the roof torn completely off? Buckle up. Seatbelts fastened. However, all three flight attendants were standing along the aircraft aisle. The one who was the closest to the front of the plane was swept out through the hole in the roof. The other two were thrown to the floor by a forceful jerk. But while one of them hit her head really hard and lost consciousness, the other one started to crawl along the aisle in an attempt to help passengers and calm them down. At that same time, the pilots were trying to contact air traffic control and signal an emergency. To make matters worse, they couldn't hear each other and had to use gestures to communicate. They also didn't know whether the radio worked and whether they had managed to deliver their message. The flight controls were sluggish and loose, and the captain was struggling to control the plane. The first officer, right by his side, dealing with communication and assisting the captain. It turned out that the controller hadn't been receiving the crew's messages until the aircraft descended to the altitude of 14,000 feet. Only then did the signal get through, and Maui Tower started urgent preparations for an emergency landing. The problem was that at that time, in case of an emergency, the airport control tower had to dial 911 just like anyone else. On top of that, the controller didn't catch that the passengers and crew members would need medical help. After all, the crew only announced that they had experienced a rapid decompression, so the controller wasn't aware of the entire gravity of the situation. In the meantime, the plane had already dropped to a height of 10,000 feet above sea level. The captain removed his oxygen mask and withdrew the speed brakes. The plane was steadily descending toward runway 2 of Kahului Airport. Following the captain's command, the first officer lowered the landing.
How can spiders survive when they lose a leg? When they're in a dangerous situation and try to run away, they can lose legs and regrow them only a couple months later. They'll survive without any problem because most of the time, their legs come off at break points. Those are joints that contain muscles and constrict, which helps spiders minimize blood loss. If they lose a leg at the part that comes before the break point, the spider still sheds it, but it will lose more blood. It will be harder for the animal to recover in this case. Speaking of spiders, have you noticed how they sometimes stay extremely still for a long time? They're motionless while waiting for potential prey to land in their web. When moving around, they waste energy and drive unnecessary attention to themselves. Either a hungry bird praying for a quick snack will see it, or a spider will remain hungry because flies will be less likely to come near their web. When spinning a web, they waste a lot of energy. Even after the web is finished, a spider may have to wait for days or weeks to catch something. So, it's important to save as much energy as possible. Hunting spiders are way more active, but the majority of them are nocturnal predators. They spend their days relaxing, tucked away under a rock or in a nest. Roast potatoes can stay hot for a really long time, and this mostly has to do with the fatty, starchy crust that's like some sort of an insulating layer. When you pre-boil a potato, this causes its starch granules to absorb water and swell until carb molecules seep out to produce this type of thick gel. Since potatoes are in the oven, high temperatures drive off moisture. This makes the gelatinized starch on the outside of the potato chunk and creates a crispy crust. This crust traps the heat inside. The fat from the baking tray collects in cracks too, and the heat-keeping structure stays strong. Birds don't get electrocuted while perching on power lines because it's not voltages that will harm them, but voltage differences, and electricity wouldn't flow without them. So, if you see a bird standing on a single power line at, for example, 35,000 volts, the lack of a voltage difference is something that keeps the animal safe. But if it accidentally extends its wings and touches another power line that's at a different voltage, it won't end well. That's the reason why electricity companies make sure there's plenty of space between the cables. Have you ever wondered why airplane pilots won't try to land on grass when the landing gear doesn't deploy? The grass may seem like a good solution at first because it's soft, true. But the surface will neither be smooth nor even. When pressure is high, landing on grass can lead to unpredictable movements and cause issues such as structure formation. That happens because of bouncing and unequal pressure. This can even result in fuel leakage and prevent the doors from opening. Bald heads tend to be shiny, even though the skin elsewhere on the human body isn't. Most of our skin is covered with tiny hairs that give it some sort of velvety peach fuzz look. With male pattern baldness, the hair follicles tend to shrink and turn into skin cells, which means there's no hair there at all. And the scalp is especially shiny due to the sebaceous glands. They produce and secrete some kind of oily matter that protects our skin. Sebaceous glands are located all across our skin, but the scalp has way more of them. So, this oil coats the skin, which is why it turns into a more reflective surface. House cats will rarely meow at one another, but they become chatty with humans, and this could be related to domestication. The process of taming cats and keeping them as pets started nearly 10,000 years ago. Before that, cats were pretty much loners. They rarely encountered other cats, so they didn't even have to use their voices to communicate with each other. Instead, they communicated through their sense of smell, which included things like rubbing against a certain object, for example, a tree. So they didn't even have to come face to face with other members of their species to send a message. And that's how they mostly communicate today as well. But humans don't have such a good sense of smell as cats, so these foxy creatures had to think of a way to send us a message and still get what they wanted from us, which turned out to be meowing. If you're planning a day trip to a desert, for example, the Sahara in North Africa, you're going to want to bring good sunscreen, and a lot of water, of course, but also a snug sleeping bag if you're planning to spend the night there too. Deserts really become cold during the night. In the Sahara, temperatures go from an average high of 100 degrees Fahrenheit during the day to 25 degrees during the night. Such dramatic change happens because of two main factors: humidity and sand. Sand doesn't retain heat that well. When light and heat from the sun reach a desert, sand grains from the top layer absorb heat. But they release it back into the air relatively quickly. So during the day, the sand radiates the energy coming from the sun, which eventually heats the air and leads to extremely high temperatures. And during the night, the sand is quickly losing heat once again. But this time, there's no sunlight that would reheat the desert. That leaves the sand colder than before and leads to such low temperatures. In arid deserts such as the Atacama Desert in Chile and the Sahara, the humidity is extremely low. That means the amount of water vapor in the air is almost zero. Unlike sand, water does well to store heat. Water vapor in the air traps heat close to the ground. It's like you cover the ground with a huge blanket. That way, you stop it from dissipating into the atmosphere. Also, when the air has a high level of humidity, it requires more energy to heat up. That means it takes more time for that same energy to disappear and for the surroundings to get colder. Since there's almost no humidity in deserts, such areas can both quickly heat up and cool down. If you microwave water for tea, it will taste worse than when it's made with a kettle. That's because the temperature of the liquid is the main factor for a good tea. Water should reach a rolling boil before you pour it over tea leaves, whether they're loose or bagged. It's an easy thing to do with tea kettles, both the electric and stovetop varieties. When the burner or the electric heating element is on, the water at the bottom of the vessel warms up. As it's getting hotter, water through the rest of the kettle comes to the boiling point. A microwave doesn't heat from the bottom up. It creates electromagnetic waves that randomly jump around the box. You probably notice when you try to reheat leftovers, they end up partially frozen in some spots and extremely hot in others. The same will happen with water because it's hard to control microwave energy. Overheated liquid won't be good for tea either. When water goes above 212 degrees Fahrenheit, which is the boiling point for water, it can destroy the compounds that give a tea its specific flavor. Have you ever wondered why those electrical plugs most Americans use have holes in the prongs? The story dates back to the early 20th century when Harvey Hubble Jr. invented different types of electrical plugs. He started with the detachable electric plug, which was the first ever of that type. Some of his designs had prongs with indents, those aligned with tiny bumps inside the electrical sockets. Such an indent and bump system secured the prongs in place after people would insert a plug into a socket. At some point, these indents gave way to holes, which worked in the same way. But that's just part of the story. Most of the modern outlets don't even have bumps anymore. They keep plugs from falling out of the wall by using friction and pressure. Today, some manufacturers insert a rod through all the holes in a line of prongs. That's how they lock them in place while encasing them in plastic. Some also say the holes save metal, which cuts costs of manufacturing in the long term.
All right, window seat on a flight to Hawaii. You get comfy and are about to have the flight of your life. As it goes on, you look out to the darkness and can't even see the clouds as you're cruising above the ocean. You notice that the flight attendant is asking everyone to shut the shades on the windows, including yours. The reason is that they want the passengers to be comfortable with the lighting. If an emergency happens, it'll take your eyes more time to adjust if there is light coming from the outside of the plane and the inside. If a power outage happens and the shades are shut, it'll be easier to act since your eyes are adjusted to the surroundings. Every second counts during times like this. Passengers are asked to leave the shades open during takeoffs during the day. And during a day flight, the cabin crew also asks passengers to leave the shades open so that the natural light outside illuminates the plane's interior. Now, there has never been an incident in history where a phone signal interference caused any problems during a flight. The idea is that when you're thousands of feet in the sky, your phone signal will bounce off different towers and the signal will get more powerful. This normally won't be a problem in mid-flight when the pilots aren't doing much work. The real concentration and critical moments are during the landing and the takeoff. The phone signals will just flood the networks on the ground, which will make the pilot's job just a little bit more annoying. Now, it seems to bother you that the windows on the plane are so small given the improved technology over the years. The windows on airplanes are so small relative to the size because they need to maximize the hull between them and increase the strength of the frame. The overall frame over the plane is actually at its strongest if there aren't any windows at all. Metal fatigue occurs over time, originating at the weak points of the plane. The bigger the windows, the weaker the frame. You lift the shades just to take a peek outside. You're so far from the ground, it looks like you're actually closer to space than Earth, but you're only 7% the distance from where astronauts go. Planes can technically go higher than that, but they can't because it won't be good for the passengers and the crew members. Planes can sometimes cause lightning storms during a cloudy flight, but don't worry, you're safe. The static creates lightning whenever a plane passes through, and it can strike while it's moving. But over the years, technological advancements improve the quality of airplanes. The electrical current of lightning is distributed throughout the aluminum structure so that it doesn't affect the controls. Some people start panicking on the flight. All the windows are shut because the flash of lightning is disturbing for many people who are trying to sleep. One person panics a little too much and tries to open the exterior door in mid-flight. Well, this is almost impossible to do because of internal pressure. You'd have to be a superhero to open it up. The plane exits the cloud cluster back into normal sky. The flight attendants are bringing out some dinner. You pull out your tray and wipe it clean. It's reported that this is the dirtiest part of the plane. Nope, not even the toilet. After cleaning it, they serve some chicken and little veggies on the side. The smell is incredible, but when you take a bite, it somehow doesn't taste as good. It's because the difference in air pressure and the low humidity alters your taste buds, especially the sweet tooth part and the salty buds. Only a few hours left until you arrive at your destination. You wake up, and the flight attendants ask you to put on your seatbelt and tuck in your tray. The plane lands and parks. You're the last one out and make your way to the baggage claim. The conveyor belt rotates, but you don't see your bags. When flights lose your baggage, there's a pretty good chance that they're still in the location where you traveled from. Occasionally, they can end up on other flights due to human error. The flight agencies can recover your luggage if you file that they're missing. You read the signs on the flight destination screen showing the arrivals and departures. These signs are written in 3 specific fonts so that people can read them from afar while walking. As you continue walking, you stare out into the large window panels. These windows are made of special material. It makes you feel like you're closer to your plane than when you look through regular ones. You notice they're driving the bags to the planes for loading and refueling them before takeoff. They fill up the planes with just enough fuel to take them to their destination, rather than pumping them with a little extra. That's because they need the planes to be as light as possible since fuel is heavy. You head outside and feel the hot wind of Hawaii in your hair. It's only a matter of time before you're dipping your feet in the ocean water. You try to find a taxi, but they're all taken. Taxis are yellow because a salesman in 1907 had a lot of cars in his lot and didn't know what to do with them. He decided to start a taxi business to make use of those idle cars. To make them stand out from the rest of the cars, he decided to color them yellow. According to a survey, yellow cars are the easiest to spot on the street. School buses also use yellow to stick out from the crowd. Colors are important in our daily lives, just like the colors of a traffic light or the flashy red color of a stop sign. But it wasn't always red. In the early 1900s, the red dye wasn't consistent and faded over time. So they used yellow instead. In the 1950s, they finally started using a red color that didn't fade away and white lettering for stop. Well, you finally find a cab and enter. You're so tired and decide to shut your eyes for a bit. Scientists still don't know why we need sleep, but it has to do with resting our brains so that we can function for the next day. You get stuck in traffic and are jolted up by the sound of honking cars. You look out the window and see the ocean filled with people. Instead of waiting in the taxi, you pay your fare, grab your bags that the airline finally found, and head down to the beach. You dip your feet and pick up a large seashell. You put it against your ear to hear the ocean. Of course, you don't exactly hear the ocean, but different frequencies of the ambient noise inside the shell echoing around. The sound just happens to resemble the ocean. You take off your shoes to feel the sand on your feet, but it's so hot that you tiptoe your way to a shady spot. The sand absorbs the heat and can retain it. 85% of sunlight can also reflect off sand and water. You open your bags and get out your towel and lay it on a soft spot. Even though you're sitting in some shade, you're still at risk of getting a sunburn. So you apply some cream to protect yourself. SPF stands for Sun Protection Factor, and the numbers mean how long it will take for the UV rays to affect your skin. After applying it, you dip in the water for a bit and see a large volcano in the distance. The sand around is somewhat black. This is because Hawaii is located in a volcanic range. The color of the sand is determined by the location, environment, and source. Most of the sand in the world is made up of quartz and trillions of particles that used to be rock. The deserts of the world used to be forests millions of years ago, but due to climate changes, everything turned to sand. Some parts of the Sahara Desert still have some geological formations suggesting that there used to be large rivers in the region. Not to mention the discovery of aquatic dinosaurs found in those ancient dry rivers. You're finally settled and sipping on a punchy drink. You see some people surfing the large ocean waves. Surfing was technically invented in Hawaii and later became a popular water sport worldwide. You hang out for a bit until sunset and then head to your hotel to take a long shower. Water was not invented in Hawaii, although it is surrounded by it. It's, an island. Why do cats like to like people? Whoops, that's supposed to read lick people. Sorry. There are a few potential reasons for this. First, they're collecting biochemical information from your skin. They could also be marking you as one of their possessions. Admit it, this totally sounds like cats. And it could be that they're just letting you know they trust you, or at least showing you they don't find you to be some serious threat or competition. How come bananas get sweeter as they ripen? Fruits don't disperse their seeds randomly. They do it when animals eat them. At a certain stage, they suddenly increase their sugar content, which is how they try to encourage animals to eat them at that stage, specifically when their seeds are mature. Mature seeds have developed special coatings that protect them when passing through the animal's digestive system. Do I have to paint you a picture? Why does our skin get wrinkly after we spend time in water? After 5 to 10 minutes in the bathtub, you will notice there are small wrinkles forming on your feet and hands. Scientists speculate that it could be the way our body gets a better grip when immersed in a slippery environment. Our wrinkly fingers improve our grip on submerged or wet objects. Also, they channel water away in a similar way to the rain treads on car tires. When you eat something really sour, you just don't feel it on your tongue. Sometimes your entire face contracts, so everyone around can see that you don't like the food you're eating. That specific sour flavor that causes this reaction is the result of the hydrogen ions that acids release when they mix with saliva. Yes, that's a mouthful of science. At the moment when your mouth detects this sign of an acid, it sends you a message in a pretty dramatic way, so you can't ignore it. It's an evolutionary response that made sense in the old times, because many of the plants that our ancestors found in nature and later wanted to consume were poisonous, especially plants with sour flavors. So even today, your taste receptors light up and your face twists in a way that is out of your control when you taste something like that. Like this. A lighter color on an airplane is actually heavier than darker paint. The color white requires a higher solid content than black to get the necessary saturation. And the higher the solid content is, the heavier the paint is going to be, which is why white paint is one of the heaviest. But white planes are more efficient than black ones, although this also depends on how you define efficient. The white paint reflects more sunlight than the dark one. Different colors absorb different wavelengths of light, and white objects heat up more slowly compared to darker ones. This results in a cooler interior, which is why it's easier for the entire plane to remain cool. If your hot tea tastes odd when you drink it out of a plastic cup, don't worry, it's not just you. You might imagine that the tea is dissolving something from the plastic, but this most likely isn't the case. The taste you perceive is not just the action of your taste buds. All senses are contributing here. That's why strawberry mousse has a sweeter taste on a white plate than on a black one. And you get the feeling chips are crunchier when you hear those specific higher frequency sounds as you eat them. Also, hot chocolate has a better taste when you drink it from an orange cup. We are kind of conditioned to drink hot tea from ceramic cups, which is why seeing it in a plastic cup subconsciously makes us expect vending machine tea that won't taste good. Flamingos often stand on one leg, and one theory says that's because it helps them conserve body heat. One piece of evidence for that is that they tuck one leg up more often in water than on land. Others believe this is how they save energy, not heat. These birds are definitely more stable on one leg when it comes to standing for long periods of time. That's because they can lock the tendons and ligaments in their legs in a stable position, which means their muscles don't have to work hard to stay in one place. Plus, it's actually a classic look, don't you think? Why do repetitive noises annoy us so much? It's simple. They're constantly attracting our attention so we can't focus on other things. We stop reacting to certain repetitive sounds like ticking clocks really quickly. But some are just too annoying, like a slowly dripping faucet. The reason why this bothers us so much is the lack of control. When you know you can stop the noise anytime you want, you won't find it that annoying. Why do all planets make circles around the sun in the same direction? It would be cool to go back 4.6 billion years. You'd be able to see that space wasn't empty back then, even though our solar system wasn't formed yet. There was a cloud of dust and gas in a place where, today, our sun and the planets are. This cloud was like a solar nebula, and it molded our solar system. Generally speaking, a nebula is a huge cloud of gas and dust that occupies the space between stars and helps form new ones, together with the planets that orbit them. When this nebula collapsed, its center became our sun, while the rest of the matter got together and created the planets we know today, together with their moons and the rest of the rocky bodies like asteroids. The matter was quickly rotating, and the process looked a bit like cheese dough flattening into a disk that was getting bigger and bigger. Since the cloud was moving in a certain direction to begin with, all of the planets retain the same orbital plane too. Something massive needs to happen to alter a planet's orbit and force it to go in the opposite direction around the sun. Why do some people have such a good singing range? There are 3 things that can affect the general range of sounds coming out of your mouth: the strength of your diaphragm, the size of your vocal folds, and the shape of the chambers in your sinuses. But making the sound beautiful is largely a question of practice. Practice? Yep. At the basic level, you hear a note and reproduce it with your voice. But the true difference between being able to just hold a tune and having a lovely singing voice is related to the thousands of small muscle contractions that are mostly unconscious. They adjust your muscle mechanism where you produce a voice with the emotions you have while singing. Like with other musical instruments, a wider finger span can help you while playing the piano. But the rest is learning those subtle things like pressure on the keys and timing. Now, why do dogs hear higher pitches than us? Humans hear frequencies up to approximately 20 kHz, and dogs up to 45 kHz. Nearly all mammals can hear higher frequencies than other vertebrates. Birds hear up to 12 kHz, and reptiles, amphibians, and fish up to 5 kHz. Mammals don't need to hear high frequencies to communicate with each other, but so they can locate where a certain sound is coming from. The special way of hearing that mammals use, binaural spectral difference cueing, works in a way that our brain compares the frequency range of a sound as it gets to each ear. Head shadows one ear, so some of the frequencies get absorbed, and our brain absorbs higher frequencies more than lower ones. And the smaller the head, the less effect it has on lower frequency sounds. That's why the animal must be able to hear high frequencies to hear a wider spectrum of sounds. A mouse needs to hear up to 90 kHz, and an elephant is fine with just 10. Dogs have smaller heads than us, so they're in the middle category. Why are oceans salty? Well, chemically speaking, salt is sodium chloride, and the salt in the ocean isn't just these two, but many other ions like calcium and magnesium. Most of these start out like rocks on land. Certain things like wind and rain erode these rocks, which basically means they gradually wear them away. So we can say most of the salt in the ocean comes from rocks. Minerals from these rocks leach into streams and rivers. They carry the salt away into the ocean. About 85% of the ions in the ocean are sodium and chloride, while magnesium and sulfate make up around 10%. And some of the salt that ends up in the ocean doesn't stay there. Animals consume a lot of it. But because of a steady supply of runoff from the surface, levels of salinity are pretty much constant. The ocean also gets its salt from one more source. hydrothermic fluids. Magma coming from behind the Earth's crust heats up deep sea vents. When they get hot enough, they lead to chemical reactions between the seawater and all the minerals from the rocks around the vents. That's why every part of the ocean is salty, but the level of salinity depends on where in the world you are. So take that with a grain of, you know.
You can easily remove Post-it notes because their adhesive is not even. Sticky notes feature a plastic adhesive. It's spread out in blobs across that sticky part of the paper. When you slap a Post-it onto a bulletin board, not all the blobs, that are technically called microcapsules, will actually touch the surface to keep the paper stuck there. You can easily unstick it. And then, when you want to reattach it to something else, those blobs of glue that are left unused will take over the role of the adhesive. Eventually, you'll use all the capsules of glue, or they'll simply get clogged with dirt. So the note won't stick anymore. It's very satisfying to chew gum because it's made of rubber. Gum from before had an elastic texture because of something called chicle, a natural type of latex rubber. Now you can chew your bubble gum easily because it's made of synthetic rubber. Some of these are used in car tires too, while others are used in Elmer's glue because they mimic the effect of chicle. Office buildings are a bit taller during the night. When the employees are finished with work, they all go home. Tall office buildings get slightly taller. For example, a 1,300-foot tall skyscraper will shrink about 0.03 inches under the weight of 50,000 people inside, assuming they're all an average weight. You could actually heat your house with just 70 people. If you've ever been trapped in a small crowded room, you know people give off body heat. So you'd need about 70 people in motion to warm up your home in the winter using just their body heat. Or maybe 140 people standing still, if you consider the house uses 4 electrical storage heaters and humans radiate approximately 100 to 200 watts of heat in normal conditions. Why does glass break so easily? It's because its atoms are not very tightly arranged. Unlike other solid material like metal, glass is made up of amorphous, which basically means structureless, loosely packed and randomly arranged atoms. These atoms can't rearrange themselves that quickly to retain a firm structure, so glass collapses and fragments shatter everywhere. Do you know why airplane passenger windows are mostly below eye level? Aircraft are way cheaper, stronger, and easier to build without windows, but they're there because many people like the view, particularly about 100 years ago when flights were often conducted at low altitudes. Also, if some passengers are feeling sick, looking out the window can help them reconnect their sense of balance, as their eyes are continually reporting what's going on around them. Windows in this position also help distribute the load around them more evenly. The floor of the cabin where people sit isn't all the way at the bottom of the aircraft, which is why windows end up being quite low compared to both the overall volume of the cabin itself and the eye level of the passengers sitting down. Water feels colder than air at the same temperature because it's denser. Because of that, your body loses heat 25 times faster while surrounded by water than it would if it was surrounded by air that was the same temperature. Since it's so dense, water has a high heat capacity, which means it takes a lot of heat to raise its temperature just a little bit. Water is good at both retaining heat and cold. That's why the ocean is way cooler than land, and at the same time, the hot soup stays hot for a long time. Water is also a pretty good conductor, which means it effectively transfers either heat or cold to the human body. Have you ever wondered why water cleans so well? It's because of its asymmetrical molecules. They are made of 2 hydrogen atoms stuck to a single oxygen atom, which means they're triangular. That's why they have a slightly different charge on their different sides, similar to a magnet. The oxygen end of the molecule is slightly negative, while the hydrogen is slightly positive. Because of this feature, water is great at sticking to other molecules. So when you want to wash away dirt, water molecules will stick to the dirt. They'll pull it away from the surface the dirt was on, no matter what it is. This is why water has surface tension. It's capable of sticking to itself too. House cats share some similarities with big wild cats, but one of the things that sets them apart is their vocalization. The majority of large cats, like tigers and lions, will roar loudly so everyone knows they're coming to defend their territory. But with house cats, most of the time, you'll just hear purrs and meows. That's because of the physiology of their throat and voice box, which helps create these feline vocalizations. So a cat can either roar or purr, but no cat can do both. Bobcats, cougars, house cats, cheetahs, they purr. Purring is specific because a cat creates it when it breathes in and when it breathes out. Roaring has evolved in a particular lineage of big cats, which includes tigers, lions, jaguars, and leopards, except the snow leopard, who lost this ability. They are capable of roaring because of the bendy bones in their throat. Mammals have their voice box in the throat, where air passing by its structures produces sounds. The vocal cords in the hyoid bones are the two main parts of the larynx that create different vocalizations in cats. You probably also prefer the pulse setting on your blender. And why wouldn't you? It just works better, and that's because of turbulence. When a blender stops chopping up food and starts spinning it around in circles only, everything you put inside is spinning at the same rate. It's not really about blending ingredients together, but about something called laminar flow. That means all the layers of liquid are continuously moving in the same direction. When you use the pulse function, your blender adds turbulence, so the fruit chunks are not just rolling around the sides of the blender, but they are falling into the center, which is when it's easier to blend them. So you'd like to open your window during a warm spring or summer day. It's so nice to hear the birds singing, and even when you come back an hour later, you'll probably still hear them singing the same song. They're hard workers, and the males are most likely guarding their territory and trying to attract a female. And other animals have their own tactics. Some like to rub their scent everywhere, but birds use a song to send the message, "Hey, I'm letting everyone know, especially other males in the area, this is my space." So they'll continue singing the same song over and over again. During the winter, they will most likely sing fewer notes to each other, or just one note. They want to let others know that where they are is their space. Plus, they're trying to figure out if there's any food somewhere nearby. Why do cats like small spaces? First of all, they are solitary animals, which is why they always search for a safe hiding place to take a good nap. And if you see a cat curled in a tiny box, it was probably just trying to find a nice, warm spot to sleep and avoid the cold floor. Cats prefer room temperatures to be about 57 degrees Fahrenheit. A bit cooler than this is comfortable for us. And if there isn't a convenient sunbeam to lie in, they will look for other solutions, like a cozy shoebox. Cats are pretty lazy. They can sleep up to 18 hours a day, most average between 10 and 13 hours on a daily basis. The majority of cats are most active during dawn and dusk. They're not the nocturnal animals that some of us think they are, but a specific category called crepuscular animals, together with other creatures like hamsters, ferrets, and stray dogs. Over millions of years, cats have evolved to become low-light predators. Their eyesight is adapted for activities during twilight. And since that's when they're most active, they save their energy for dusk and dawn. Before they became domesticated, cats would have had to expend large amounts of energy at these times, finding, going after, and catching their prey. House cats no longer need to hunt before each meal, but their natural instincts still encourage them to conserve energy for twilight periods. Why are four-leaf clovers so rare? Similar to animals, plant genes are located in small packages of DNA in the nucleus of each cell. They're called chromosomes. Our chromosomes come in matched pairs, but clovers have 4 copies of every chromosome per cell. There's a gene responsible for four-leaf clovers, and it's recessive. That means this plant will create 4 leaves only if it has a 4-leaf gene on all 4 chromosomes, and that's pretty rare. Also, some environmental conditions like soil activity and temperature can also affect whether the 4 leaves appear. Interestingly, these anomalies tend to happen in clusters, so if you find one, look around you, there might be more of them.